On a blood-stained beach, a red mechanical soldier kneels beside a fallen comrade. Rita Vertaski stands tall in her armored suit as the sun blazes over the battlefield. Suddenly, an eye snaps open in terror, beads of sweat rolling down a pale face. A pair of hands tightly grips an open book filled with complex text. Keiji Korea lies paralyzed on his bunk, gasping for air after a haunting vision. He slowly sits up in the dimly lit barracks while a radio broadcasts the weather. A memory of a mechanical fist striking with explosive force flashes through his mind. Overwhelmed by nausea, he covers his mouth and tries to steady his racing heart. He grips his arm while pulling on his combat boots, recalling the sensation of death. From the bunk above, a hand drops a mysterious document for him to sign. Keiji stares at the paper with wide, nervous eyes, trying to make sense of the request. The document appears to be a formal pledge written in dense Japanese characters. Confusion grows as he tells his bunkmate that he has already signed one before. Jean Yanabara leans down to explain his devious plan to steal alcohol from the store. Keiji remains skeptical, holding the confession paper as Jean describes the unit's strange traditions. Hanging upside down, Jean casually mentions that they are deploying for battle the next morning. The news of the imminent rollout leaves Keiji completely stunned and breathless. He recoils in pain after accidentally slamming his head against the hard metal bunk frame. Jean peers over the edge to check on him, noting his strangely frantic behavior. He realizes he spent the entire night reading instead of joining the others for drinks. Keiji questions if his nightmare was real while receiving advice to relax before his first deployment. He acknowledges his mounting fear and accepts his role as a soldier entering combat the next morning. Humanity struggles in an unprecedented global war where mechanical suits clash amidst massive explosions and aerial support. The enemy consists of grotesque monsters called mimics that possess terrifying maws filled with jagged teeth. These creatures of unknown origin use sharp spikes to impale the earth during their relentless advance. A gaping mouth reveals the horrific biological nature of the monsters trying to wipe out all of humanity. Keiji stares into the distance while reflecting on the long history of this brutal global conflict. Citizens in the city continue their lives as the war remains a constant presence since his childhood. The United Defense Force struggles to hold its ground while a tattered flag waves over the smoky ruins. Soldiers run drills in the heat while discussing reports of mimics swarming through regions like Okinawa. A strategic map illustrates the overwhelming movement of the alien horde as they finally target Japan. Base Flower Line on the Boso Peninsula serves as the critical front line for the upcoming defensive operation. Technicians assemble high-tech battle jackets made of unique composite armor that only Japan can produce. Rita Vertaski leads her U.S. Special Forces into the fray while brandishing a colossal mechanical battle axe. Keiji realizes he will be fighting alongside the world's most successful anti-mimic units starting tomorrow morning. His bunkmate offers cynical advice about avoiding friendly fire and keeping a cool head during the chaos. Jean mocks the sanity of veteran soldiers while claiming their sergeant has more muscle than brain matter. The intimidating Sergeant Bartolome Farrell suddenly appears right behind the terrified soldier to offer extra training. Jean immediately snaps into a frantic salute and tries to praise the sergeant's mental fortitude. A wall clock shows the early morning hour as the time for their final preparations rapidly approaches. Sergeant Farrell orders the 17th Company to assemble at the training field at 900 hours. He bellows at the top of his lungs when he receives a faint response. The startled recruits snap to attention and shout their compliance in unison. Farrell explains that a surprise inspection revealed numerous inadequacies in their equipment. He mentions the base commander is particularly tense due to the arrival of the U.S. Special Forces. The sergeant departs the barracks while the soldiers wonder what kind of punishment awaits them. Keiji looks on with a dazed expression as he predicts they are headed for physical training. Jean reacts with pure shock and disbelief at Keiji's oddly specific foresight. Keiji clarifies that his knowledge comes from a vivid dream he had earlier. He mentions the dream involved 3 grueling hours of isometric push-ups. Jean stares intently at Keiji while hoping the prediction does not actually come true. The sun beats down on the Flower Line base tower behind a perimeter of barbed wire. The recruits suffer through hundreds of push-ups on the hot asphalt under strict supervision. Jean struggles through the exercise while realizing Keiji's nightmare is playing out exactly as described. Keiji sweats profusely while questioning how his dream could possibly manifest in reality. He maintains his focus despite the impossible nature of the situation unfolding before him. Nearby soldiers from a different unit jeer at the recruits and tell them to shout louder. Jean huffs in frustration at the mocking onlookers while Keiji remains locked in the exercise. Several hulking members of the U.S. Special Forces stand near a hangar with a small woman. Keiji looks toward the elite group and realizes he has finally spotted the legendary Rita Vertaski. Rita Vertaski stands composed between two towering, muscular guards in the afternoon sun. Keiji and Jean watch her from their exercise position with expressions of pure bewilderment. Jean cautions his friend against judging the legendary soldier by her small stature. Keiji finds it hard to believe the delicate-looking woman is the feared Full Metal bitch. As the recruits continue their count, Jean shares rumors about her unit being purely for show. Keiji listens while his face drips with sweat from the ongoing physical punishment. He finds himself questioning whether he has encountered this woman at some point in the past. Jean notices the fixed stare and playfully asks if his comrade has fallen in love. Suddenly, Rita tilts her head and looks directly toward the group of trainees. Keiji recoils in alarm as he realizes the elite warrior has caught him staring. A heavy combat boot steps forward onto the pavement with a distinct sound. Rita leaves her squad behind and begins walking toward the line of exhausted recruits. Her intense gaze fixates on the soldiers as they whisper among themselves in confusion. The young woman walks past several rows before coming to a sudden halt. Keiji peeks up from his isometric hold to see where the famous soldier has gone. Rita stands tall and delivers a crisp military salute to the supervising officer. The startled official looks up from his seated position beneath a shaded tent. She points a finger toward the training field and asks to join the current session. Jean is baffled as the officer stammers his approval for Rita to join them. The legendary soldier then drops onto the asphalt to join the recruits in their workout. Keiji strains through his exercise, sweat pouring down his face as he counts his 80th repetition. Rita matches his pace effortlessly, her eyes focused while she calls out the next count. A sudden question breaks the rhythm as she asks if there is something on her face. While holding her form, she notes his staring, causing a flustered Keiji to stammer a denial. He offers a quick apology for his wandering eyes, which she accepts with a short acknowledgement. As the count climbs toward 1,000, Keiji finds it hard to believe this ordinary girl is a legend. The afternoon sun beats down on the military facility as training finally concludes for the day. Cool water splashes over Keiji's face, washing away the grime and exhaustion of the physical labor. Leaning over the communal sink, he realizes the actual session was far shorter than his vivid dream. He dismisses his strange premonitions as mere fatigue just as a familiar voice calls out to him. Jean playfully strikes his friend's back while excitedly declaring that it is time to party. Feeling uneasy, Keiji insists on staying behind to read instead of joining tonight's festivities. Night falls over the airbase, leaving the transport helicopter silhouetted against the dark mountain range. Alone in the quiet barracks, Keiji reclines on his mattress and opens his book to pass the time. A chill runs through him when he realizes he already knows the text on the unread pages. He tries to rationalize the sensation by wondering if his friend had summarized the plot previously. Turning away from his book, he watches the rowdy soldiers celebrating through the distant window. The recruits cheer and drink together, bracing for the inevitable clash with the mimics the following morning. Keiji remains detached from the noise, his gaze reflecting a growing sense of dread and confusion. He settles into a grim determination, focusing entirely on surviving the coming day to return home. Keiji grips his book tightly as he tries to calm his racing thoughts. He sits alone on his bunk, convincing himself that his vision was just a nightmare. The following morning begins with the heavy rhythmic thumping of soldiers marching toward the hangar. Massive mechanical combat jackets stand ready for deployment as the recruits rush to their stations. Engineers perform final checks on the rows of armored suits lining the busy departure bay. Keiji is fitted into his massive mechanical suit as the mission details are broadcast throughout the hangar. The heavy helmet shell descends over his head and locks into place with a mechanical hiss. A sea of armored soldiers charges across the tarmac toward the waiting transport vessels. The recruits board the massive helicopters as the rotors whip up dust around the base. Inside the dark cabin, Keiji stares at his glowing head-up display while sweat beads on his forehead. The transport fleet reaches Kotoyoshi Island and begins a relentless aerial bombardment of the coastline. Plumes of fire and smoke erupt from the jungle as the first strikes hit their targets. Radio static crackles through the comms as the unit moves into the dense tropical terrain. Keiji breathes heavily inside his helmet, struggling to maintain his composure amidst the rising tension. The squad takes up defensive positions on a sandy path, aiming their heavy machine guns forward. A commanding officer shouts final orders to the nervous recruit to ensure he stays focused. A massive explosion tears through the earth nearby, sending debris flying into the air. The sheer force of the blast confirms that this is no longer a training exercise. Alarms blare across his HUD as a warning indicates the enemy is finally closing in. KG gasps for air as the terrifying reality of the battlefield settles deep within him. Debris flies everywhere as a thunderous explosion rocks the battlefield nearby. A soldier spots the incoming threat and shouts through the comms. Sweating under the intense pressure, KG hears the command to open fire. He lets out a guttural scream while unleashing a relentless barrage of bullets. Tracers and muzzle flashes illuminate the air as projectiles fly in every direction. A grotesque mimic reveals its alien features through the thick smoke and dust. The squad drops to the ground to find cover while maintaining their aim. Another massive cloud of smoke erupts as heavy ordnance strikes the earth. A blinding flash of energy consumes the immediate area with a deafening roar. Chaos ensues as a soldier is suddenly struck down by a high-speed projectile. A lethal javelin round pierces straight through an armored helmet with terrifying precision. An endless swarm of spherical mimics rolls across the terrain like a tidal wave. Realizing the sheer scale of the attack, a recruit screams in pure desperation. The unit attempts to reposition quickly to avoid becoming sitting ducks. Heavy mechanical footsteps crush the debris as the soldiers scramble for safety. Intense energy beams suddenly tear through an armored suit with lethal force. A comrade is blown back as a desperate shout for a friend echoes. Another soldier crawls out from a crater, gasping for air amidst the ruins. The horrific sight of a shredded and smoking suit reveals the enemy's power. KG stares wide-eyed in frozen terror at the absolute carnage surrounding him. Blood splatters across the dirt as a fellow soldier is shredded by enemy fire. KG watches the slaughter in paralyzed shock while sweat beads on his forehead. A spherical mimic lunges forward from the chaos with its mechanical teeth bared. The alien weapon releases a blinding flash of energy from its central core. The lethal beam tears straight through KG's neck and chest in an instant. He lets out a final, distorted cry of agony as his body fails him. The sheer force of the blow knocks his armored suit into the dust. KG writhes on the ground while screaming about the intense burning sensation. His helmeted head twitches uncontrollably as he lies dying in the ruins. With a bloodshot eye staring upward, he realizes that he is truly finished. The monstrous mimic hovers over him to finish the job during his final seconds. His consciousness fades into a dark void as death finally takes hold. The entire scene suddenly fractures and disintegrates like a pane of glass. KG finds himself holding a paperback book while lying on a soft mattress. He sprawls across his bunk, gasping for breath while drenched in cold sweat. An extreme close-up of his eye reveals his pure terror and confusion. He sits up in a daze, wondering how he could still be breathing. Clutching his uninjured chest, he realizes he has returned to his room. He stares at his hands in disbelief while trying to find his bearings. A superior officer suddenly hands him a document and tells him to sign. KG stares at the paper in his hands, confused by the sudden request to sign a confession. He struggles to focus while the vivid memory of his own brutal death haunts his mind. A gruesome image of his face melting under an alien beam flashes through his consciousness. He clutches his head in a cold sweat, trying to shake the phantom pain of the impact. Overwhelming nausea causes him to retch violently over the side of his military bunk. KG hunches over in total exhaustion while a fellow soldier asks if he is feeling alright. The recruit remains silent as he reflects on the impossible reality of his sudden survival. His pupils dilate with pure terror as he focuses on a single, terrifying thought. He shouts in disbelief when his bunkmate mentions that the squad deploys tomorrow morning. The shocking realization that he has returned to the previous day leaves him completely paralyzed. KG frantically grabs a paperback book and begins flipping through the pages in a panic. He stops to stare at the novel and a pen lying quietly on the mattress. His bunkmate looks down from the top bed, questioning KG's increasingly erratic behavior. KG scans the text about a detective gathering suspects to explain a murder mystery. He stares intently at the page while realizing that he remembers every single word. The fear deepens as he confirms he already finished this chapter before the actual battle. He reads the passage regarding free green tea and realizes it matches his memory exactly. Sweat drips down his face as he contemplates the implications of this impossible temporal loop. He continues to tremble while his comrade tries to get his attention once more. A final, horrific vision of his armored body being torn apart by energy resurfaces. A phantom memory of his left arm being severed in battle flashes before him. He questions in the shadows if the gruesome events were truly just a dream. The recruit stares at his book while realizing he has actually died twice already. His eyes widen in pure panic at the sheer impossibility of his situation. He looks toward the base tower and realizes staying means facing death tomorrow. A terrifying image of a violent explosion consumes his thoughts once again. Keiji remains hunched on his bed while his bunkmate watches him with concern. Suddenly he bolts from the bunk with a desperate and frantic energy. He sprints out of the dormitory as his confused comrades call out after him. Driven by survival instinct, he decides he must run far away from the base. Sweat pours down his face as he gasps for air during his frantic escape. The small metal wheel of a supply cart clatters loudly against the floor. Keiji rounds a corridor corner and spots a woman pushing a heavy cart. A sudden collision sends objects flying in a loud and chaotic impact. He falls to the ground beside a woman named Rachel amidst spilled potatoes. The young woman looks up with concern and notices that he is bleeding. Keiji dismisses her worry while scrambling to his feet to continue his flight. He ignores her suggestion to seek treatment and waves her off in a panic. A massive sergeant enters the hallway and stares at the mess on the floor. The officer stops and sternly asks Korea if he is responsible for the accident. The sergeant narrows his eyes and scrutinizes Keiji's face with an intense gaze. He suddenly reaches out and grabs the recruit's chin to examine the bloody wound. Keiji awkwardly pulls away and insists that the injury is not worth any concern. The officer dismisses him from physical training and orders him to the infirmary instead. Keiji acknowledges the command with a hollow stare while sweat beads on his forehead. Sergeant Farrell turns his back to walk toward the other recruits in the distance. Standing in the quiet hallway, Keiji watches the officer disappear through a doorway. He abruptly breaks into a run and leaves the fallen supplies behind him. Rachel watches from the ground as the young man disappears down the corridor. A security guard at the base perimeter gate checks an identification card. Keiji reflects that desertion is his only choice to avoid another certain death. He successfully slips past the guard and sprints along the desolate coastal road. His chest heaves with exhaustion while he forces his legs to keep moving. The sun reflects off the water as the long road stretches ahead indefinitely. He encourages himself with the thought that this path leads to a nearby town. A highway sign flashes past while he dreams of escaping to anywhere else. A sudden voice from the path ahead causes Keiji to jump in shock. An elderly man and a small girl walk toward him along the seawall. Keiji stops in his tracks and stares at them with wide, frantic eyes. The old man explains they are just civilians checking the color of the sea. Keiji breathes a sigh of relief after realizing he successfully escaped the military base. He stares at the civilians and convinces himself that he is finally out of harm's way. Leaning forward to catch his breath, he remains oblivious to the looming threat nearby. Suddenly, a high-speed blur decapitates the elderly man right in front of his eyes. A violent impact shatters the concrete wall behind the falling body as debris flies everywhere. The young recruit stands frozen in absolute horror while blood sprays from the headless corpse. The small girl stares ahead blankly with her face covered in fresh splatters of blood. Another sharp projectile whistles through the air and leaves a dark mark on the wall. Both civilians lie mangled on the ground as their lives are extinguished in an instant. Keiji looks down in revulsion at a detached eyeball resting in a pool of gore. He remains paralyzed with shock amidst the carnage while smoke rises from the impact site. His breath hitches in his throat as his face contorts into a mask of pure terror. Looking toward the ocean, he notices something moving behind the massive concrete tetrapods. A spherical mimic with rows of jagged teeth rises over the seawall to confront him. The creature opens its mouth to reveal a terrifying and complex inner structure. His eyes widen in despair as he realizes he has been hunted down by the enemy. The monster fires a lethal spike that slams into the ground near his feet. He turns and desperately tries to run back toward the safety of the base. A sudden projectile shears through his right leg and sends him tumbling through the air. Keiji collapses onto the hard pavement while blood gushes from his horrific new wound. A lethal projectile whistles through the air with a deafening screeching sound. The high-speed round tears through Keiji's upper torso and shreds his clothing. He arches his back in agony while blood erupts from his mouth and chest. The alien mimic displays its horrific maw full of grinding stone-like teeth. Keiji is thrown backward by the sheer force of the impact while screaming in pain. A final catastrophic flash of light signals the end of his failed escape attempt. Suddenly Keiji wakes up in his bunk as a radio announces the morning forecast. He lies paralyzed with sweat dripping down his face while listening to the broadcast. A hand enters his field of vision and presents a document for him to sign. Sitting up on his mattress, he asks Yanabaru if he is carrying a weapon. His friend leans down from the top bunk and confirms that he has a gun. Keiji remains hunched over with his hair covering his eyes and asks to see it. Yanabara pulls out a black semi-automatic pistol and warns that it is currently loaded. The recruit takes the firearm and stares at it with a dark, hollow expression. He pulls back the slide to confirm that a live round is in the chamber. While his companion continues to chatter, Keiji holds the weapon with a steady grip. Yanabara looks down from above and expresses confusion at his friend's intense behavior. With wide and vacant eyes, Keiji suddenly shoves the barrel deep into his mouth. A violent blast erupts as he pulls the trigger in a desperate act of suicide. A spent casing falls toward the floor while blood and shadows spray against the wall. After the darkness of death fades, the cycle begins anew with the opening of an eye. The military base stands tall against the clear morning sky as the day restarts once more. A radio clicks on and begins broadcasting the local weather report to the sleeping barracks. Keiji remains motionless on his bunk while gripping a small paperback book in his hand. He focuses on the printed words of his novel while processing the horror of his situation. Staring blankly at the ceiling, he finally accepts the impossible reality of his infinite resurrection. The broadcast continues as he realizes that his own death is the trigger for the loop. Looking out at the chain-link fence, he confirms that all his memories remain perfectly intact. No matter the method or location of his demise, the result always brings him back here. He determines that he is bound by a cruel and inescapable rule of the universe. A dark shadow falls across his face as he contemplates the heavy burden of his knowledge. Yanabara leans down from the top bunk and casually asks him to sign a document. Keiji looks up at his friend and poses a hypothetical question about an endless first time. His eyes widen with a haunting intensity while he describes a life that repeats forever. The other recruit looks on with visible confusion while Keiji compares the situation to a board game. Yanabara scoffs at the idea and shares his own disdain for repeating traumatic combat missions. Ignoring the light-hearted banter, Keiji understands that even a firing squad cannot grant him permanent rest. He visualizes himself as a solitary figure trapped in a world where only he faces death repeatedly. His expression hardens into a mask of pure steel as he makes a definitive choice. Resolve burns in his eyes as he vows to fight through the carnage until he finds a way out. Keiji sits on his bunk with a pen and a small book while looking determined. Meanwhile, he reflects on the 4 specific times he has already died. Leaning over, he begins to write a mark onto his own skin. Shortly after, a bold number 5 is drawn on the back of his hand. Memories of playing with toy guns against imaginary aliens as a child suddenly surface. Children wearing goggles engage in a mock shootout behind some garden bushes. Young Keiji smiles while playing the role of a sacrificial hero for his friends. He charges into the line of fire with reckless abandon during their game. Next, the boy lets himself be pelted by toy bullets to distract the enemies. Falling to the ground dramatically, he acts out a heroic demise for the group. His teammates cheer and charge forward to claim victory in his honor. Back in the present, Keiji pants heavily while holding himself up during training. He stares at his sweating hand, realizing that real death contains only agony. The entire recruit squad performs push-ups together in the hot base courtyard. Keiji's expression turns lethal as he sets a simple objective to survive the carnage. He questions his ability to deal with the monstrous mimics on the battlefield. Yanabara calls out to him while they both struggle through the exhausting exercise. His comrade points toward the elite U.S. Special Forces arriving on the scene. Rita Vertaski stands among the personnel with a calm and stoic gaze. Keiji watches the legendary soldier with a mixture of awe and desperate hope. While continuing their push-ups, Keiji rejects the idea that Rita is merely a figurehead for the military. Rita stands silently with an unreadable expression as the recruits watch her from the hot pavement. Sweat pours down Keiji's face as he focuses intensely on the memories of his first horrific battle. He vividly recalls his first death, where he crawled through a smoking wasteland amidst destroyed tanks. A mechanical beeping rings in his ears as his vision begins to blur and distort from trauma. Struggling for breath, he clutched at his chest while his armored suit beeped with critical warnings. Suddenly, a monstrous mimic burst forth from the ground to ambush the lone, wounded soldier. The creature's armored shell shattered into pieces as a violent explosion rocked the immediate area. Keiji let out a piercing scream of agony as the chaos of the battlefield overwhelmed him. A heavy piece of equipment or debris flew through the air during the heat of the encounter. In a flash of movement, Rita Vertaski swung her massive battle axe to cleave through the alien threat. She stood triumphantly over the remains of the mimic while holding her blood-stained weapon. The legendary soldier loomed over the fallen recruit with her visor partially revealing her calm face. Leaning in closer, she unexpectedly asked Keiji if green tea is truly free in Japan after meals. Keiji coughed up blood and stared at her in complete disbelief at such an absurd question. She explained her policy of asking locals for advice rather than trusting everything read in books. Glancing down at his armor, she read his name aloud and noted his division and blood type. With his life fading, Keiji looked up and desperately asked if he was about to die. Rita knelt beside him and bluntly confirmed that his death was indeed moments away. He could only grimace and curse his misfortune as the world began to go dark around him. Rita introduces herself properly to the dying recruit, staring deeply into his eyes with a promise to remain until his final breath. Keiji looks up through the shattered visor of his suit as his life slips away. A single tear tracks down his face amidst the grime and blood of the front lines. She tells him to find peace in the next world while callously mentioning she will take his battery. Keiji offers a weak cough and a grim smile at her cold pragmatism. Meanwhile, radio chatter confirms the perimeter is secured and mentions a strange code for a delivery. Nearby soldiers react with confusion to the odd terminology used over the comms. Light trails suddenly streak down from the sky toward the coastal battleground. A massive explosion erupts behind Rita as she stands firm beside the fallen soldier. Keiji remains motionless on the sand with his Japanese unit markings clearly visible. Rita grips a heavy projectile tightly while sensing the arrival of more enemies. Numerous objects rain down from the atmosphere onto the smoking beach. Several mimics burst forth from the ground to resume their relentless assault. Rita readies her giant axe and tells Keiji to stay put as she prepares to fight. A mimic lunges forward with its maw open and spikes ready to kill. She becomes a blur of motion as she dashes toward the encroaching monsters. With a single powerful swing, her weapon shatters the core of the nearest alien. The creature's armored body is torn asunder by the sheer force of her impact. Keiji can only watch in awe at the superhuman speed displayed by the legendary soldier. Rita tightens her mechanical grip on the massive shaft of her heavy weapon. Speed and lethal force merge into a high-velocity blur across the sand. She fires a specialized piledriver spike forward with incredible momentum and precision. Her focused eyes remain steady as she prepares her next crushing move. The colossal axe head pulverizes the mimic's armored shell into fine debris. Keiji watches from the ground while marveling at her divine displays of power. Alien fluids and shattered plates spray outward during the brutal dismantling process. More fragments of the creature's hard exterior are ripped away by sheer force. The legendary soldier stands tall and invincible among the wreckage of her enemies. A massive mimic carcass looms in the background amidst the thick battle smoke. A heavy internal mechanism clicks into place to prepare for the final impact. Keiji attempts to crawl through the sand with his last ounce of strength. The dying recruit decides that he will at least take one mimic down. Rita senses the sudden movement and glances back at the struggling soldier. Keiji throws himself at the nearby mimic with a final roar of defiance. A violent explosion marks his end before he suddenly awakens in the past. Rita appears in the training hall looking healthy and full of silent strength. Keiji finds himself back in the routine of performing endless rows of push-ups. He grits his teeth in exhaustion while Rita walks past the training line. A fellow recruit remarks on the brief and cold nature of her inspection. Keiji watches Rita's retreating back as she walks away from the formation of recruits. Confusion sets in when he realizes she isn't performing her usual routine beside him. His eyes widen in shock while sweat drips down his face from the exertion. A memory of Rita questioning his stare flashes briefly through his mind. He realizes that his subtle changes in behavior have altered the timeline's course. The weight of this revelation fills him with a sudden, renewed sense of purpose. His trembling hand presses into the ground as he continues his grueling physical training. A fierce determination burns in his gaze as he accepts this new possibility. He calculates the slim odds of survival and vows to increase them eventually. The brutal exercise session stretches on for several hours at the military base. Walking through the facility hallways, Keiji clutches his aching muscles in complete exhaustion. He acknowledges his current status as a mere novice despite his growing memories. A sudden outburst from a nearby room catches his attention as he passes. Inside the lounge, a group of soldiers engages in a heated strategy game. The long-haired recruit relies on his instincts while making a move on the board. Keiji stands frozen as he listens to the veteran's advice on tactical mastery. The sergeant explains how repetition is the true key to perfecting any skill. Focusing on the game pieces, Keiji draws a parallel to his own movements. A powerful epiphany about the art of war strikes him with sudden clarity. Nearby, a veteran soldier prepares for his own workout by tightening his boots. Keiji approaches Sergeant Ferro Bartolome in the hallway to initiate a conversation before the upcoming battle. Ferro questions if Keiji is feeling discouraged while the recruit reflects on the sergeant's legendary survival record. As Ferro prepares for his own workout, Keiji decides that this veteran instructor is his best resource. Looking directly at the experienced soldier, Keiji asks for permission to join his private training session. The sergeant dismisses the request immediately, telling the young recruit that such late efforts are pointless. Walking away to finish dressing, Farrell mentions an old samurai philosophy regarding the necessity of real combat. Showing the scars on his neck, Farrell explains the concept of cutting down enemies to gain experience. The veteran details how historical master swordsmen achieved their status through surviving thousands of lethal duels. Keiji absorbs this information in silence, his mind racing to connect the sergeant's words to his loop. An intense realization settles over him as he considers that strength only comes through repeated warfare. He understands that survivors are simply those who have had more opportunities to learn from death. Sensing a shift in the atmosphere, Farrell turns back to glance at the strangely quiet recruit. A slow, knowing smirk begins to spread across Keiji's face as the true potential of his situation dawns. The veteran grows increasingly unsettled by the recruit's sudden change in demeanor and silent laughter. Keiji's eyes take on a dark, manic intensity as he realizes the loops provide him infinite training. Catching himself, the recruit offers a quick apology while Farrell continues to stare at him with suspicion. He explains his new resolve to treat every moment on the battlefield as a permanent lesson. Looking down at the number 5 inked on his hand, he calculates the compounding value of his experiences. Standing before a massive combat suit, Keiji vows to eventually surpass even the greatest masters of war. Farrell watches him depart, noting that something is deeply and dangerously wrong with the young man's eyes. Keiji's gaze darkens as he fully embraces the grim reality of his situation. Sergeant Farrell exhales deeply, clearly bothered by the recruit's unsettling change in attitude. The veteran orders Keiji to prepare for suiting up in 15 minutes. Farrell shouts across the courtyard for the young soldier to stop idling and change. Meanwhile, the image of Rita Vertaski looms large as the world's ultimate hope. Keiji reflects on the inescapable rules that now govern his life on the battlefield. He realizes that every action can be rewritten through the power of the loop. In order to break free, he commits himself to honing his skills under Farrell. With each subsequent death, the recruit's perspective shifts and his focus sharpens. The narrative notes that the story has reached its 12th iteration. Keiji initiates a high-speed training exercise within a heavy mechanical combat suit. The armored frame lurches forward with violent power during the initial trial. Farrell watches with surprise as the recruit's suit skids across the training area. The veteran questions the young man's sanity as the machine whirs with intense energy. Keiji pushes the suit to its limits, sliding across the pavement at dangerous speeds. Inside the helmet, his eyes burn with a desperate intensity and physical strain. He charges toward distant training targets while keeping his momentum steady. Farrell barks orders for him to continue running without losing his balance. The heavy mechanical feet of the suit stomp rhythmically against the concrete floor. Standing side by side, Farrell instructs his pupil to disable the suit's internal auto-balancer for true mastery. Keiji expresses concern about losing his balance without the auto-balancer while Farrell warns him about speed. The veteran soldier emphasizes that a single moment on the battlefield determines life or death. Despite the difficulty, the recruit continues running through the chaotic environment in his mechanical suit. His body is violently torn apart as he experiences 7 more deaths during his training. By the 12th loop, he finally manages to move with complete freedom across the terrain. He finds himself surrounded by a swarm of terrifying, spherical mimics rising from the ground. Breathing heavily inside his helmet, Keiji stares down the monsters with grim determination. Another iteration ends abruptly as his armored frame is caught in a devastating explosion. Back in the safety of the barracks, he diligently studies a technical manual to improve. His eyes scan the lines of text while he analyzes his tactical mistakes from previous loops. Sitting alone, he marks his arm with the number 13 while planning his offensive strategies. He considers the standard 20mm machine gun as a potential weapon for the coming fight. Although the gun can easily shred training targets, its effectiveness remains questionable against true enemies. A massive mimic appears largely unaffected by conventional gunfire during Keiji's mental evaluation. The soldier reviews other heavy options like rocket launchers and RPGs stored in the armory. Realizing these weapons are insufficient, he searches for something with more penetrating power. He focuses on a specialized pile driver that launches a lethal tungsten carbide stake. Keiji approaches a base technician to request a power suit for extra night training. The worker urges him to rest for tomorrow's battle, but the recruit remains persistent. Standing in the dim light, he stares at the heavy weapon required to pierce a mimic's hide. Explosions rock the desolate terrain as Keiji continues his high-stakes training under heavy fire. The soldier maneuvers his powered exoskeleton through a minefield of debris and smoke. Catching sight of a lone mimic, he quickly prepares for a close-range engagement. He charges forward with surprising speed, catching the spherical creature completely off guard. Closing the distance, KG readies his arm-mounted weapon for a decisive point-blank strike. The armor of the mimic cracks open to reveal a horrifying interior filled with jagged spikes. Sweat pours down KG's face as he realizes the sheer lethality of the alien's defenses. Ignoring the danger, he presses the heavy pile driver against the monster's thick hide. The lethal tungsten stake sits ready to fire within the mechanical barrel of his weapon. Suddenly, a sharp projectile flashes through the dark, heading straight for the soldier's helmet. Blood sprays violently across the battlefield as the strike instantly ends another failed attempt. KG jolts awake in his bunk, his heart racing from the memory of the fatal impact. Gasping for air, he struggles to ground himself in the safety of the quiet barracks. His sudden outburst startles Jean, who looks over from his bed with confusion and alarm. Clutching his head, the recruit tries to compose himself while his comrade watches in silence. A dark resolve settles over KG as he vows to conquer his fear of the mimics. He takes a marker and carefully adds the number 15 to the count on his hand. Another loop ends in a flash of violence as his helmet is torn from his body. Back in the barracks once more, he stoically updates the tally on his skin to 17. Embracing the cycle of rebirth, he accepts that death has become his most reliable ally. KG adds the number 21 to the growing tally on the back of his hand. Back in the heat of battle, he faces down a spherical mimic with his weapon raised. Sweat drenches the recruit's face as he lets out a primal roar of sheer determination. With a powerful mechanical thrust, he drives the pile driver deep into the alien creature. The mimic's tough exterior shatters into 1,000 fragments from the force of the impact. Jagged pieces of the monster rain down as the lethal weapon finishes its job. Standing over the wreckage, KG gasps for air while absorbing the reality of his first kill. The mangled heap of alien flesh and spikes lies silent on the battlefield floor. Wide-eyed with adrenaline, the soldier realizes he survived the encounter without a single scratch. He stands triumphantly over the debris, marking this moment as the true beginning of his evolution. KG gazes out across the war zone, his resolve hardening as he grows increasingly lethal. Amidst the chaotic skirmish, he observes Yanabara firing desperately at a charging mimic. The veteran recruit rushes into the fray, positioning himself for another devastating strike. A sickening click echoes through his armor as his pile driver unexpectedly jams in mid-combat. Panic briefly flashes across his face as he screams out against the mechanical failure. Despite the malfunction, he forces the weapon against the mimic's cracking outer shell. A long tungsten stake finally erupts from the barrel, piercing through the monster's core. The alien entity disintegrates into shards under the weight of the massive projectile. A fellow soldier slides to a halt nearby, asking KG if he is still functioning. Yanabaru watches his former pupil with pure astonishment, unable to comprehend the soldier's sudden mastery. KG receives word that more enemies are approaching from the east. Surrounding infantrymen discuss the recruit's sudden and inexplicable combat prowess. Reaching his 47th iteration, he has evolved into a warrior who shocks the entire platoon. A restrictive warning sign hangs prominently on the fence of the secure military zone. Vast storage hangars loom behind the metallic wires of the perimeter. 2 sentries in full camouflage maintain a strict watch over the entrance. KG hides behind a dense bush to scout the area from the shadows. He observes that the guard rotation remains exactly the same as before. The young soldier notes that the sentries are carrying their standard-issue M16 rifles. His gaze fixes upon a specific warehouse marked with the number 5. Looking at the tally on his hand, he reflects on the limited capacity of his current gear. He realizes that obtaining a weapon with infinite ammunition is his only path forward. An armored vehicle nears the checkpoint, causing the guards to offer a sharp salute. From his concealed position, KG tracks the car as it enters the restricted area. He tenses his muscles, preparing to spring into action at the perfect moment. The recruit dashes toward the complex as the vehicle approaches a split in the road. A cleaning lady suddenly steps out into the path of the moving car. This sudden interruption successfully diverts the attention of the stationed guards. Seizing the chance, KG sprints along the side of the building toward the entrance. One of the sentries begins to glance back just as the intruder reaches the door. KG maneuvers through the open yard, successfully staying hidden within the guard's massive blind spot. Glancing back at the entrance, he confirms that his infiltration of the facility is complete. His sneakers strike the floor as he picks up speed within the silent interior. Navigating the complex machinery of the high-tech hallway, he moves deeper into the restricted zone. A sharp gaze peers through the shadows, searching for a specific target among the bays. He finally spots a young mechanic working diligently underneath a pair of towering powered suits. The recruit suddenly speaks out, causing the startled woman to let out a panicked shout. Her round glasses slip from her face and clatter onto the metallic floor. Scrambling blindly for her eyewear, she accidentally bangs her head against the heavy mechanical frame. Keiji reaches down toward the ground to retrieve the fallen glasses for her. Introducing himself as Korea Keiji, he returns the spectacles to the flustered mechanic. She quickly slides the frames back onto her face while trying to hide her embarrassment. The young woman identifies herself as Shasta Rail and offers a timid word of thanks. Without wasting any time, the soldier informs her that he has an urgent request. Shasta reacts with shock and confusion, misinterpreting the sudden intensity of his approach. Looking directly at her with a focused stare, he demands she manufacture a specific piece of equipment. She tilts her head in bewilderment, asking for clarification on what he wants her to create. Keiji points toward the heavy armament and specifies that he needs a battle axe just like Rita's. Standing amidst her tools and machinery, the dedicated mechanic prepares for the task ahead. Shasta repeats the request with wide eyes, stunned by his desire for such a primitive weapon. Keiji points to a massive battle axe hanging on the wall, but Shasta immediately refuses his request. She gestures toward a powered suit while explaining she is already busy with essential repairs. Despite her young appearance and petite frame, the brilliant technician is actually a high-ranking lieutenant. The recruit reflects on her status as a genius who serves as Rita Vertaski's dedicated engineer. Noticing she isn't swayed, Keiji reaches into his pocket to retrieve something that might catch her interest. He pulls out a sleek custom memory chip and offers it to the surprised mechanic. Shasta's eyes widen with greed as she lunges forward to grab the valuable piece of tech. The soldier holds the chip high above his head while the frantic engineer jumps repeatedly. Her feet leave the ground as she desperately pleads for him to hand it over. Realizing she has a weakness for rare technology, Shasta reluctantly agrees to listen to his terms. Keiji maintains a cold and serious expression as he reiterates his demand for the battle axe. The mechanic goes quiet, clutching her tools while she considers the danger of his request. She warns him that trying to imitate Rita's combat style will only lead to serious injury. A powered suit stands with the massive weapon as Shasta describes its incredible 200-kilogram weight. She explains that the inertia from a single swing is enough to tear an unprepared soldier apart. A close-up of a mechanical hand gripping the weapon highlights the perfect control required to wield it. The visualization shows a suit performing a high-speed maneuver that would be impossible for an average pilot. The sharp head of the axe slams into the ground, shattering the earth with immense force. Shasta explains that Rita's specialized suit doesn't even come equipped with a standard auto-balancer. Rita Vertaski stands before her squad, cementing her status as a uniquely powerful elite within the special forces. Keiji stands in deep thought while looking down at the small technician. He ponders the advantage of removing extra weight that he never actually uses. Shasta reacts with shock, asking if he truly thinks he is special like Rita. The recruit remains silent, his eyes hidden behind a fringe of dark hair. Looking away, the engineer explains that Rita's nature is fundamentally different from others. She remembers a quiet moment in the hangar when Rita stood before her gear. The elite soldier expressed a chilling gratitude for being born into a world of conflict. Shasta shuts her eyes, still feeling the weight of those unsettling words. She looks up at Keiji with a searchingly intense gaze, questioning if someone like him could ever possess such a grim worldview. A close-up reveals Keiji's unwavering and cold expression as he listens. Shasta frantically waves her wrenches while insisting she doesn't think her friend is scary. She bows her head, struggling to articulate her complicated feelings for the legendary pilot. Keiji remains impassive, simply stating that he understands the point she is making. He reflects on the fearsome reputation that often leads others to misunderstand the war hero. Standing near the heavy equipment, he asserts that Rita is not actually cold-hearted. The mechanic stares at him in complete surprise after hearing his unexpected perspective. Keiji clarifies that his need for the axe isn't about trying to be like Rita. He points out the fatal limitation of weapons that rely on a meager 20 shots. Shasta is left stunned as he demands a weapon that functions without any ammunition. Keiji suggests he would even be satisfied with a simple spear or a cutlass. Shasta repeats the names of the primitive weapons with a look of utter confusion. The recruit leans in, stating his absolute necessity for anything that ensures survival. A moment of silence passes as the technician stares blankly at the intense young man. Keiji stands tall and delivers a heartfelt plea for her to help him. Shasta looks up with an inquisitive gaze, trying to understand his motives better. Clutching her wrench, she remarks that he is certainly a very peculiar soldier. The close-up of Keiji's face shows an unwavering focus despite his apparent exhaustion. Shasta notes that the famous Valkyrie once shared a very similar sentiment with her. A faint and rare smile touches Keiji's lips as he accepts the comparison. The mechanic reminds him that such specialized equipment is notoriously hard to use. Keiji gazes at the massive axe while claiming he has all the time he needs. Shasta suddenly springs into action, grabbing her tools to start the work. With a decisive step, she finally gives in to his persistent request. She runs off toward the scrap metal pile to find the perfect materials. Heavy industrial machines begin grinding and cutting as the fabrication process starts. Peering through her welding goggles, Shasta maintains a sharp eye on the molten steel. Keiji stands in profile, his thoughts turning toward his pursuit of the legendary pilot. The technician suddenly asks about the mysterious number 47 marked on his hand. He looks back at her with a stunned expression as the question hangs in the air. Keiji stares at the number 47 on his hand while contemplating his strange situation. He compares the ink on his skin to a prisoner crossing off days on a calendar. Curious about the writing, Shasta asks if it signifies a special occasion like a girlfriend's birthday. A heavy shadow falls over Keiji's face as he prepares to explain the morbid reality of the Count. The finished battle-axe finally appears in the workshop as a testament to his many lives and deaths. Clad in his camouflaged combat suit, the recruit tests the weight of the massive new weapon. He takes deep, steadying breaths inside his pressurized helmet while focusing on the upcoming battle. A single eye flashes with fierce determination as the training cycle begins once more. The carnage of war is instantaneous as a mimic projectile pierces through another soldier's skull. Keiji shouts a curse while swinging his oversized axe through the chaotic mess of the battlefield. The high-speed maneuvers put immense pressure on his equipment and cause the armor plates to fracture. Losing his grip, the heavy blade slams into the rocky terrain with devastating force. The recruit stares in silence at the weapon lodged deep within the crater he just created. Frustrated by his lack of control over the unwieldy axe, he acknowledges the immense challenge ahead. A series of timestamps marks the progression of his repetitive and exhausting daily schedule. Keiji eventually collapses from the sheer physical and mental drain of his endless training. His mechanical suit is systematically disassembled following another grueling session of combat practice. Life on the base becomes a blur of routine events that repeat in a predictable cycle. He stands in the cafeteria line among laughing soldiers who remain oblivious to his struggle. The lunch lady pours onion soup into his bowl while he shows the number 8 on his hand. A drop of liquid splashes up with the exact same trajectory as previous loops. Keiji observes the repeating phenomenon with a hollow and tired expression. A nearby soldier shouts in pain as the hot soup scalds his arm. The recruit carries his tray through the cafeteria while his comrades compliment the cook. Rachel winks at the men while frying shrimp at her kitchen station. Moving to a seat, Keiji places his tray down with a heavy and repetitive motion. He looks down at his lunch with a sense of deep-seated boredom. The prospect of eating the same meal for 80 days straight makes him weary. He forces himself to take a bite of the fried shrimp to keep his strength up. A sharp headache strikes while he slumps over the table in the crowded mess hall. Other recruits point toward a lone figure they identify as Rita Vertaski. Keiji rubs his forehead while watching the elite soldier from across the room. Rita eats her meal in total silence several rows ahead of him. He continues to watch her every movement while she stays focused on her food. The timing of their encounter is just another consequence of his fixed daily routine. Rita prepares to pick up a bean from her tray with her chopsticks. A single bean accidentally bounces off the tray and heads for the floor. The legendary soldier reacts with lightning speed as the small object falls. She catches the falling bean directly in her mouth as Keiji looks on. Rita finishes her lunch precisely at 11:45 and pauses for a brief moment. A single pickled plum is gripped tightly between a pair of wooden chopsticks. Rita stuffs the sour fruit into her mouth with a quick and casual motion. The intense flavor causes the elite soldier to react with a look of sudden shock. Keiji watches the repetitive scene from his seat with a dull and knowing look. He observes Rita's youthful behavior while reflecting on her reputation and actual age. Staring down at his soup, he wonders how she would look in normal civilian clothes. A massive shadow suddenly looms over Keiji as he tries to finish his meal. Sergeant Farrell leans in close to interrogate the recruit about his grim expression. Keiji looks back with confusion at the unexpected and hostile confrontation. He attempts to brush off the intrusion while realizing this encounter never happened before. Pharaoh barks a loud insult about KG's miserable face in front of the mess hall. The recruit wonders if the sergeant simply has a personal grudge against his looks. Pharaoh aggressively grabs KG by the collar and causes his soup to spill everywhere. KG remains silent as his lunch drips slowly onto the cafeteria tray. The sergeant gets into his personal space to scream about KG ruining his appetite. Rita briefly glances back toward the noise of the escalating argument. Rachel yells from the kitchen area for the men to stop their fighting immediately. The cook steps in to defend KG and tells the sergeant he is going too far. KG stands alone holding his empty bowl after the physical confrontation ends. He looks at his own haggard reflection in the dish and realizes how exhausted he truly appears. Rachel offers a piece of fried shrimp to de-escalate the tension in the room. The sergeant lunges forward with a roar while the kitchen staff cries out in fear. KG smoothly evades the grab while a piece of food flies through the air. Pharaoh crashes violently into a mess hall table as his momentum carries him forward. The recruit catches the airborne shrimp perfectly between his chopsticks with uncanny precision. He calmly returns the food to the stunned cook while the onlookers watch in silence. Pharaoh erupts in a fit of rage as the surrounding soldiers begin chanting for a fight. KG stands amidst the noise and realizes his combat instincts are taking over. The sergeant prepares a heavy blow while demanding the recruit give up his resistance. Ducking low, KG reflects on how his time looping has changed his perception of battle. Bets are placed among the cheering crowd as they anticipate a one-sided slaughter. The recruit deconstructs every millisecond of the sergeant's attack into a series of frames. He perceives time as a slow sequence of manageable parts rather than a continuous flow. Comparing the man to a mimic, he visualizes the fatal openings in his opponent's guard. Pharaoh huffs with exertion as he grows increasingly frustrated by his inability to land a hit. KG maintains intense focus while observing the sergeant's telegraphing every intended move. Identifying a critical flaw in his opponent's stance, he waits for the next opening. A left hook comes swinging and the recruit effortlessly shifts his torso to avoid it. He sees a right straight follow-up and contemplates how many times he could have already killed the man. Realizing that winning would only bring unwanted attention, KG continues to dodge while his comrades cheer. KG decides to purposely take a hit to avoid any further suspicion. Just as a sharp command rings out through the mess hall to stop the brawl, Rachel successfully places herself between the combatants to prevent any more strikes, while the recruit feigns a clumsy mistake just as the final blow approaches. Pharaoh's massive fist continues its trajectory toward KG's face, landing a heavy blow that sends the recruit crashing to the ground. Stunned onlookers gather around to witness the aftermath of the knockout. The fallen soldier lets out a faint groan while lying motionless. As soldiers complain about lost bets while the crowd begins to disperse, Rita Vertaski glances back with a look of recognition for the recruit's movements. An intricate sketch of combat armor rests on a desk during an interlude. The next chapter begins as the scene shifts to the base kitchen, where various cooking utensils hang quietly from the ceiling. KG's eye flutters open as he slowly regains his consciousness. Finding Rachel peering down at him from above with gentle concern, he remains silent while slowly processing the current timeline, eventually moving to sit on a row of chairs to assure the cook he is fine. Rachel expresses relief while attempting to apologize for the sergeant's aggressive behavior. Rubbing his face, KG admits he was unaware of how dark his expression had become, causing the woman to remark that he looked like someone who had just watched a friend die. KG stares blankly ahead while the weight of his previous failures begins to sink in. Memories of the last iteration flood back as he recalls fighting desperately against the mimics. A sudden explosion of light signals the chaotic end of his previous life on the field. He remembers grandstanding in front of his peers only to be struck down by his superior. The horrifying image of Sergeant Pharaoh being torn apart by an enemy attack flashes before him. Pharaoh's lifeless eyes haunt KG as he relives the moment the veteran soldier fell. KG's own eye reflects the sheer terror of witnessing his mentor's brutal and final demise. A crumpled photograph of Pharaoh smiling with his family serves as a painful reminder of loss. Back in the kitchen, the recruit vows to be more careful in the upcoming loop. Rachel takes a long drink from her can while observing the young man's somber mood. She breaks the silence by questioning why he chose to hold back during the mess hall brawl. Gesturing with her hand, she notes that he is clearly stronger than he let on. KG looks away and admits that he experiences more than enough fighting on the battlefield. The cook listens quietly with a sympathetic expression as he reveals his weary perspective. She suddenly shifts the topic by asking if he has a girlfriend waiting for him. As the conversation turns toward the impending battle tomorrow, she sets her drink aside. Rachel takes a moment to adjust her hair while a comfortable silence settles between them. She surprises the recruit by mentioning that she has no plans for the evening. Keiji looks up with wide eyes as the implication of her offer begins to register. She playfully warns him not to get the wrong idea while leaning back against the counter. Keiji stares with a heavy gaze that reflects the mental strain of his repeating lives. He shifts his weight while preparing to depart from the quiet sanctuary of the kitchen, politely declining the cook's invitation by claiming he is not the person she is searching for. Rachel watches him leave with a somber expression as he mentions his need to train. He steps through the doorway and leaves the warmth of the mess hall behind him. The woman remains seated on the counter alone and stares at her drink with disappointment. Hurrying through the sterile corridors of the base, Keiji focuses his mind on his next moves. His expression hardens as he pushes through the physical fatigue that currently plagues his body. He reflects on a past life and a different girl named Rachel Kasaragi whom he once knew. Memory takes him back to a grand school library where his unrequited feelings first blossomed. He recalls watching a quiet student lost in her books under the sunlight of the atrium. The sight of a mystery novel brings back the image of her favorite genre and gentle presence. Keiji lowers his head while acknowledging the bittersweet nature of that distant high school crush. Maneuvering past other personnel in the corridors, he realizes that his recruitment was not driven by her. He runs across the tarmac beneath the roar of low-flying fighter jets while examining his own motives. Reaching the training area, he calls out to his superior officer with a sudden burst of energy. The sound of metal clanking echoes as Sergeant Farrell continues his grueling weightlifting workout without pause. Farrell notes the recruit's bruised face and asks if he is feeling unwell before tomorrow's battle. The veteran maintains his rhythm with a heavy barbell while Keiji considers the philosophy of living once. Keiji boldly asks to join the intense training session to improve his skills for the coming battle. Static fills the screen as time begins to blur and the cycle of death continues. In the 99th iteration, Keiji dies skewered by black spikes 45 minutes into the fight. During the 110th loop, he lies dying while reflecting on a comrade's fatal mistake. By the 123rd run, a debilitating migraine plagues his mind inside the cockpit. Another 61 minutes pass before a massive blow ends his life once again on the field. Standing amidst a pile of slaughtered enemies, he breathes heavily during his 154th life. Sweat pours down his face as he struggles to maintain consciousness within his heavy battle helmet. A brilliant flash of white light signals the end of another failed attempt at survival. Now a seasoned veteran, he swings a heavy battle axe with lethal precision against his foes. Marking the 158th iteration, his cold gaze remains fixed on the mission ahead. He sits silently in his power suit with a hardened expression born from endless combat. Looking down at the chaos, he realizes that every death has been for this moment. Black spikes streak across the gray sky as the 158th battle intensifies. He focuses his vision on the incoming threats while ignoring the exhaustion in his limbs. An explosion rocks the sandy ground near his squad as the enemy forces press their advantage. A panicked soldier shouts his name over the comms amidst the roar of the battlefield. Clouds of dust and debris rise into the air following a series of heavy impacts. Swirling trails of energy carve through the atmosphere while the soldiers hold their ground. 3 spherical mimics with gnashing teeth advance across the barren wasteland toward the human lines. His teammates stare in shock as an unexpected development unfolds during the heat of battle. A mimic is torn apart as a powerful blow cleaves its stony shell and blocky teeth into pieces. Another pair of monsters disintegrate into clouds of gore while a blur of steel sweeps through them. Keiji slams his massive axe into the earth, crushing a creature into the dirt with incredible force. The surrounding soldiers watch in stunned silence as the former recruit displays his newfound lethality. His sergeant barks orders at the squad, finally recognizing that the heavy axe is far more than show. Instructions blare through the headsets for the entire company to focus on supporting Keiji's advance. He becomes the spearhead of the formation as the veterans are told to clear his path. Standing tall among the chaotic movement of troops, he prepares to lead the next offensive surge. A brief glance toward his superior confirms he is ready to take command of the front lines. His internal monologue reflects a cold realization that he is no longer a helpless pawn of war. He stares forward with the eyes of a hardened veteran who has survived 100 lifetimes. While transport ships drop reinforcements into the smoke, black spikes continue to rain from the sky. Leaping through the air, he silhouettes against a massive blast before diving back into the fray. The heavy blade carves a path through the enemy lines with a single, devastating circular swing. Landing with precision, he fixes his gaze on the next target with predatory intent. Far from the front, Rita and her team notice a soldier whose movements defy all logical predictions. He pauses on the ridge to survey the burning horizon as transport helicopters navigate through the debris. The heat of battle begins to take its toll as sweat drips down his concentrated face. Suddenly, the ground shatters as jagged black spears erupt from the earth in a surprise assault. A nearby soldier screams in agony as a mimic looms over them with its spiked maw wide. A heavy strike connects with a resounding clang, stopping the monster's assault in its tracks. KG dives between the lethal spikes to pull a comrade away from the creature's reach. He raises his massive axe and brings it down with the strength of a veteran. The mimic's armored shell shatters into pieces as the blow hits with pinpoint accuracy. Smoke rises from the destroyed enemy while KG stands over the breathless soldier on the ground. He looks down at the man and mentions a rugby game from a month ago. The soldier stares up in total shock, unable to comprehend how KG knows such details. Despite the chaos, KG remains calm while explaining that talking to him wasn't originally his idea. He gives a cryptic warning for the man to keep his composure during the fight. The confused soldier asks what on earth KG is talking about in the middle of battle. Hauling the man up, KG tells him he owes him one and notes his recovery. Their armored fists collide in a brief moment of solidarity before they split up. The young soldier sprints back toward the main line of the enemy advance. He reflects on a moment of peace and green tea that feels alien to this war. Looking toward the distant explosions, he catches sight of a lone figure with an axe. He realizes that Rita is operating in the most dangerous sector of the beach. Shells rain down indiscriminately, turning the entire zone into a graveyard of dust. He watches the carnage with a growing concern for her safety amidst the fire. The sight of her crimson armor begins to lift the spirits of every nearby soldier. Rita Vertaski emerges as the goddess of the battlefield, a terrifying and beautiful vision of war. KG overhears soldiers discussing the respect behind Rita's infamous and harsh nickname. He wonders internally if he has succumbed to the same unrequited feelings as the others. He acknowledges that the repeating loops would eventually erase any time they spent together. Returning to the slaughter, he heaves his axe through the air amidst massive explosions. A sharp sound catches Rita's attention, causing her to freeze in her tracks. KG senses a shift in the environment and turns to face a new threat. He narrows his eyes, peering through his visor at a shape in the distance. A colossal mimic emerges from the dust and smoke of the ravaged beach. The armored creature reveals its massive head, looming over the remains of the battlefield. KG identifies the monster as the exact same one from his very first life. With a look of intense focus, he prepares to prove his newfound combat prowess. He slams his mechanical foot into the ground, readying himself for a direct assault. Sudden electronic interference fills his ears, disrupting the flow of his thoughts. A simple greeting cuts through the heavy static of his internal communication system. Shock registers in his eyes as he recognizes the source of the transmission. A lone soldier stands atop a mound of earth, framed by a targeting grid. Rita makes her presence known, her name appearing prominently across his vision. The two elite fighters face one another across the smoking ruins of the beach. KG remains paralyzed with surprise as a voice calls out to him again. She confirms she is indeed addressing him through the chaos of the ongoing war. KG's eyes widen as he processes the sudden and unexpected voice in his ear. He continues to stare in disbelief, trying to reconcile the transmission with the battlefield chaos. His expression shifts into one of deep confusion and dawning realization. The soldier remains motionless while the electronic static crackles through his helmet. A momentary silence falls over his thoughts as the reality of the situation sinks in. He looks toward the source of the voice with a mix of awe and uncertainty. Glancing down at his armored legs, he feels the weight of his equipment against the sand. He adjusts his footing, the mechanical joints of his suit whirring softly amidst the carnage. A heavy sense of gravity settles over him as he prepares to respond to the call. The scene shifts back in time to an era far removed from the current conflict. A map highlights a small town with a tiny population in the state of Illinois. In this peaceful landscape, a young girl spends her days surrounded by nature and butterflies. She walks slowly along a dusty path leading toward her humble family home. A farmhand notices her distant mood and pauses his work to check on her. The young girl remains silent, her eyes filled with a quiet and unreadable sorrow. He asks if she has been scolded, trying to coax a response from the somber child. With a kind smile, he offers a trip to town to brighten her spirits. He gently pats her head in a gesture of simple and fatherly affection. She responds with a playful face, her mood lifting as she watches him return to work. The family truck eventually rattles down the road, leaving the quiet farm behind. A heavy boot clicks against the floorboards as a customer enters the small general store. The white-bearded shopkeeper welcomes the young girl and her father inside his cozy establishment. He enthusiastically presents a batch of coffee beans while explaining their exotic Hawaiian origin. Leaning over the counter, the girl offers a bright and curious expression to the old merchant. Various trinkets, including silver crosses and old pocket watches, rest beneath the glass of the display. A small television screen provides a grim update on the UDF Quarantine Division's recent activities. She focuses on a small pendant while news of the military's withdrawal from Hawaii fills the room. The merchant notes that the shipment is likely the last one they will ever see from the islands. Anxiety grows as the girl's father wonders if the approaching mimic threat will spare their rural town. The shopkeeper discusses the alien nature of the enemy and the lack of any possible communication. Trying to break the tension, he jokes about the man's past training in the martial arts. He then turns his attention to the girl, asking if she has any interest in joining the army. Her father remains skeptical, reminding the merchant of her youth and their family ties. He stares ahead with a somber face, confirming he has no desire to leave for the front lines. Despite the talk of war, the girl maintains her cheer and expresses a simple love for her home. The scene shifts to the evening as a heavy blanket of snow begins to fall over Pittsfield. The farmhouse is quickly buried under the weight of a record-breaking cold and winter storm. An abrupt and jarring noise suddenly pierces through the muffled silence of the blizzard. Tucked safely under her blankets, the girl hears a persistent clanking sound coming from the radiator. She stirs from her sleep and rubs her eyes, looking toward the source of the disturbance. Curious about the noise, she pulls back the bedroom curtain to peer outside into the darkness. A horrific sight greets her as a blood-soaked figure lies impaled on a jagged stake. Her eyes widen in sheer terror as the reality of the gruesome scene begins to sink in. Before she can scream, her father suddenly lunges forward and grabs her in the hallway. Trembling with confusion, the girl frantically asks what is happening as her world turns upside down. Her father stands at the doorway with a desperate intensity, signaling for her to move immediately. He wastes no time and forcibly pulls her through the house toward the exit. Panic sets in as she shouts for her father while being dragged into the freezing night. They burst through the door and sprint across the yard into the blinding white blizzard. She glances back over her shoulder, her face contorted with a sudden and sharp realization. A massive wall of fire and thick black smoke consumes the horizon behind their home. Frozen in shock, the young girl stares at the destruction leveling the distant town. Her father quickly throws open a hidden storm cellar hatch and orders her to get inside. He gives a final, stern command for her to stay hidden and never come out. The wooden door begins to descend, slowly cutting off her view of the snowy world above. Submerged in the oppressive shadows of the cellar, she struggles to find her bearings. A faint groan leads her to her mother, who lies gravely wounded on the cold ground. The girl collapses beside her dying parent, begging her to hang on as tears well up. Outside, the heavy hatch slams shut and is quickly covered by the drifting winter snow. Several monstrous mimics emerge from the storm, their mechanical legs clicking as they hunt for survivors. Mechanical legs scritch across the snow-covered hatch where the girl is hidden. Suddenly, a heavy truck bursts through the blizzard with its headlights blazing. The driver grips the steering wheel with intense focus from inside the cabin. He steers the rugged vehicle directly into the path of a towering mimic. The truck's front end slams into the creature's side with incredible force. Wheels spin frantically against the ice as the driver pushes his engine to the limit. From a high angle, the truck pins the spherical monster against the frozen ground. The man glares at the enemy through the cabin window with a look of rage. Several black spikes suddenly pierce through the cabin walls, narrowly missing him. The collision destroys the truck, forcing the man to scramble out into the deep snow. He stands his ground in the freezing wind, recognizing the horror before him. He steels his nerves, realizing that he must kill the beast or die trying. Surrounded by mechanical monsters, he adopts a combat stance amidst the rising smoke. He shouts a fierce taunt at the mimics, beckoning them to attack him. A sudden blur of motion indicates a violent clash between man and machine. His eye widens as he tracks the lightning-fast movements of the creature. With a powerful and calculated blow, he manages to shatter the mimic's core. The girl presses her hand against the glass, watching the struggle from her hiding place. Pieces of the destroyed mimic scatter across the frozen ground as it disintegrates. Panting with exhaustion, the man stands alone in the storm after the brutal fight. The father stands tall amidst the falling snow, blood trickling from his mouth as he smiles defiantly. In the distance, the mechanical remains of the mimic collapse and shatter into the frozen ground. He looks back one last time, urging his daughter to survive before his strength finally fades. Rescue teams eventually reach the location, their voices calling out through the dark and snowy wreckage. A soldier discovers the young girl huddled beside her mother's motionless body in the ruins. She stares blankly at her mother, who remains silent and completely unresponsive in the biting cold. The weight of the tragedy sinks in as the child realizes she is now truly alone. Only a shattered chimney remains of their family home, standing as a grim monument to the attack. The girl watches from a distance as soldiers organize the aftermath of the brutal Mimic massacre. Rows of black body bags stretch across the snow, representing the lives lost in the small town. The desolate landscape reveals the immense scale of horror inflicted by only 3 lone Mimic scouts. Her expression hardens into a mask of grief while she is shipped off to distant relatives. Years pass until she stands before the imposing, angular architecture of a military recruitment facility. She acquires a stolen passport to bypass age restrictions and volunteer for the front lines early. Now using the identity of Rita Vertaski, she officially joins the United Defense Force for vengeance. She stands among hundreds of adult recruits, a small and determined figure in the military formation. Her presence is barely noticed by the tall soldiers surrounding her during the morning roll call. Shadows fall over her face as her eyes burn with a singular and murderous intent. 3 lonely crosses on a hill now mark the site of her former life and family. She stares out at the vast, empty expanse of the world she has sworn to protect. Desolate landscapes stretch across the globe as the Mimics terraform the surface of the earth into desert. A massive Mimic rises from the sea while excreting substances that are beneficial to alien life forms. The drive of all life to seek better habitats manifests across the natural world and within DNA. Evolutionary processes continue to shape the adaptation of every living organism in the struggle for survival. 6 months after her enlistment, Rita Vertaski is fully immersed in the violent chaos of the battlefield. Her intense gaze and heavy breathing reflect the immense pressure of serving in an elite combat unit. She charges past the detonating Mimic, her armored jacket suit providing the speed necessary to survive. Holding her massive firearm steady, she focuses on her target while artillery fire rains down around her. A powerful explosion of light bursts from her weapon as she fires a lethal shot at close range. The blinding flash of the muzzle flare momentarily illuminates her face amidst the smoke and sparks. She continues to sprint through the dense fog of war, gasping for air as the fighting intensifies. A sudden question about her well-being echoes through her headset while the dust begins to settle. A tall soldier wearing specialized combat gear walks toward her through the wreckage of the front line. The man is identified as Arthur Hendricks, a platoon leader with bright hair and a calm demeanor. Rita looks up at him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and surprise at his sudden appearance. Arthur offers a gentle and knowing smile even as missiles and bullets streak through the sky behind him. He places his large, mechanical hand on her helmet in an uncharacteristically tender and comforting gesture. She is visibly flustered by the physical contact, barely able to form a coherent response in her confusion. Arthur begins to tell an unusual story about ancient nomads who consumed animal blood for vitality. He stands firm amidst the shelling, continuing his history lesson while keeping his hand on her head. Rita remains speechless as her wide eyes reflect a deep sense of disorientation and shock. Arthur breaks the silence by jokingly asking if his peculiar history lesson is boring her. Shaking off the tension, she quietly assures him that she has regained her composure. The platoon leader wishes her luck before jogging back toward the chaotic heat of combat. She watches his retreating form with renewed focus, acknowledging his orders with a soft response. Her thoughts drift to the realization that his random chatter was a deliberate attempt to calm her. The battle rages on as a massive armored figure sprints through a corridor of fiery explosions. Suddenly, Rita's pupil constricts in a moment of pure instinctual alarm at an unexpected sight. An abnormally large and grotesque mimic with jagged spikes looms over the battlefield. Without hesitation, she unloads her heavy ordnance directly into the creature's gaping maw. A jarring sensation pierces through the sensory overload as the world begins to warp. She suddenly finds herself standing completely naked under a stream of falling shower water. Cold realization washes over her as she looks up, questioning how she escaped the front line. The rhythmic spray from the shower head continues to fall in a now eerily quiet room. Stepping away from the stall, she frantically scans her surroundings for any clue to her location. A digital clock on the wall displays a time over 30 hours before her recent combat. She stares into a mirror with a dazed expression, trying to reconcile her memories with reality. Placing a hand against the cold glass, she struggles to comprehend the impossible shift in time. The certainty that she was just facing death on the battlefield remains vivid in her mind. it becomes clear that her current situation is linked to the strange mimic she just killed. The second iteration begins as Rita enters the battlefield once more. She unleashes a relentless barrage of gunfire from her heavy weapon. Sweating under the pressure, she narrows her gaze with intense focus. She targets the unique creature again to test her theory about the time shift. The cycle repeats instantly, dropping her back into the steaming shower stall. By the third iteration, she continues the fight while questioning the chaotic reality. Entering her fifth loop, she begins to wonder if this nightmare is merely a dream. By the eighth repetition, her desperation grows as she searches for an exit. During the 12th iteration, she confirms the spiked mimic is the central key. Exhaustion starts to show in her bloodshot eyes behind the suit's visor. She notices that more mimics gather to protect their leader with every new loop. Her determination hardens as she stares down the increasingly impossible odds. She maintains her fire while navigating a field littered with fallen comrades. She observes a soldier whose fate seems to change between different loops. Powerful blasts strike the rocky terrain as the battle reaches a fever pitch. A well-placed shot detonates a mimic into a spray of dark fragments. Rita catches a glimpse of the chaos through the fractured shards of combat. Screaming in fury, she pours every ounce of her remaining strength into the assault. The world resets yet again, leaving her standing silently under the falling water. She realizes her standard rifle is insufficient against the growing swarm. Rita obsessively researches every piece of available information to understand the nature of her enemy. She determines that her standard-issue rifle is no longer sufficient to secure a victory. Approaching a technician, she requests a specialized prototype weapon that functions without the need for ammunition. Her eyes burn with a fierce desire to find a way to eliminate every mimic present. Thrusting a massive piledriver into the fray, she obliterates a mimic in a single crushing blow. She pauses to catch her breath while surveying the effectiveness of her heavy new armament. The sharpened tip of the mechanical piledriver glistens with the remnants of the fallen creature. Despite her growing fatigue, she maintains a sharp focus as she stares down the next threat. Navigating the desolate canyon, she wields her enormous polearm with renewed purpose and intensity. A sudden revelation strikes her as she begins to piece together the mechanics of the conflict. She contemplates the dark mystery of the time loop that seems to empower the alien invaders. Noticing the strategic placement of enemy reinforcements, she realizes the mimics are also retaining their memories. Sweating inside her heavy combat suit, she mentally prepares herself for an even tougher challenge. She tightens her grip on the weapon's handle, bracing for the next inevitable reset of time. The terrifying truth dawns on her that the enemy can also manipulate time to their advantage. She refuses to accept a reality where the mimics can simply undo their tactical failures. Charging ahead with raw power, she uses the piledriver to carve a path through the swarm. Convinced that the loop follows a specific logic, she looks for a way to break it. She smashes through a mimic with overwhelming force, determined to steal the secrets of their strength. Her silhouette stands strong against the chaos as she continues her relentless fight for survival. Rita reflects on her relentless vow to survive every single encounter. Her eyes burn with a fierce resolve to break free from the cycle. A photograph of a newborn baby appears as a symbol of new life. Soldiers celebrate boisterously as their captain shares the news of his child. Rita receives a quiet thanks while she remains focused on her clipboard. She inwardly questions the number of times she has witnessed this exact moment. The sound of laughter fills the room while she stands silently among the men. A glance at the captain's smiling face triggers a deep sense of unease. A sudden, piercing headache strikes her in the middle of the crowd. Clutching her head, she struggles to maintain her composure during the festivities. The pain intensifies as she suspects a connection between her condition and the loop. Turning away from the group, she examines a detailed report on the mimics. Scientific data confirms that the invaders emit tachyon pulses to signal through time. She absorbs the truth about the enemy's ability to manipulate temporal flow. Standing firm, she contemplates the specific mechanics used to trigger the resets. Walking through the corridor, she remains deeply lost in her strategic thoughts. A sudden collision occurs as she bumps into a technician carrying a metal case. Technical components spill onto the floor amidst a frantic cry of alarm. She offers an apology to Second Lieutenant Shasta while helping collect the items. A startling realization hits her because this interaction is a new anomaly in the sequence. Shasta explains that the fallen objects are external memory units used in combat jackets. A technical display highlights how these units record every movement and biological change during battle. Rita crouches to assist Shasta while questioning the necessity of such exhaustive data collection. She listens as Shasta explains that past combat data is analyzed to refine military strategies. A hand reaches out for a memory unit while Rita ponders the mimic's operational similarities. Shasta mentions she is backing everything up locally in case the main servers fail. Rita freezes in place as a sudden, world-shaking realization begins to take hold of her. Her eyes widen in shock as the concept of backup provides the final missing piece. She envisions the mimic network where a central server uses surrounding units as temporal anchors. Flashes of previous battles remind her that the loop continued even after destroying the server. The truth dawns on her that the enemy operates through a vast, interconnected network. Shasta calls out Rita's name, noticing her comrade's sudden trance-like state and intense focus. The veteran soldier finally understands the hidden mechanism that allows the invaders to reset time. Clad in her heavy armor, she determines that the entire network must be eradicated. She narrows her eyes with a grim determination to stop the enemy from succeeding. A view inside a dark, jagged opening suggests a path toward the heart of the hive. Standing amidst the wreckage of a mimic, Rita acknowledges that a specific procedure is required. She prepares herself to launch a final, decisive assault to put an end to the cycle. The first step of her plan requires the total destruction of the mimic's server's primary antenna. The second phase involves a complete massacre of every remaining mimic serving as a backup. Rita focuses her mind on the final step necessary to dismantle the temporal cycle. She delivers a devastating blow with her battle axe to shatter the mimic server. Heavy breaths escape her as she stands amidst the wreckage of the defeated core. The soldier remains motionless while the weight of the long battle begins to lift. She looks down and vows that the cycle of death is finally over. A defiant shout echoes across the battlefield as she declares her freedom from the loop. The veteran warrior stares ahead in disbelief after surviving her 211th iteration. She gazes upward and realizes that she has truly escaped the endless repetition. The morning clouds drift slowly above as a sign that time has resumed its course. Her captain lies dead on a stretcher with a baby's photograph resting beside him. Several mourning soldiers gather around their fallen leader to pay their last respects. Rita stares blankly at the scene while processing the sudden loss of her comrade. A recruit weeps bitterly and takes the blame for the captain's tragic demise. The picture of the child serves as a reminder of the life left behind. The unit stands together with bowed heads during a moment of profound collective sorrow. Looking at the body, Rita ponders why the captain died only in this timeline. A dark and painful realization about the cruelty of fate settles in her heart. The distant city spires represent the ongoing war that still demands more sacrifices. Decorated with medals, Rita stands amongst officials while reflecting on the cost of survival. She acknowledges that a battlefield without death is an impossible dream in this war. Rita's medal glimmers while she recalls the heavy thoughts that once weighed upon her. The modern city skyline stands tall with flags fluttering against a backdrop of towering buildings. Researchers meticulously study Rita's physiology and brain function to unlock the secrets behind the temporal anomaly. Advanced machinery scans her head to analyze the damage caused by repeated exposure to alien tachyons. She emerges as humanity's singular hope while standing atop a mountain of fallen alien mimics. 211 iterations of war transform her into an unmatched veteran of the battlefield. Rita looks away from rows of fallen soldiers while acknowledging the vast gap in experience between them. Surrounded by the jagged remains of her enemies, she prepares to continue the fight for victory. Her unwavering determination shines through her visor as she pushes forward through the chaos of combat. The quiet structure of the flower-lined Bay Sky Lounge overlooks the desolate landscape below. A single droplet ripples across the dark surface of a cup of freshly brewed coffee. Keiji stares out the massive bay windows of the lounge while a timer counts down. He looks down at a sea of sleeping recruits who remain unaware of the coming storm. Rows of trainees perform repetitive physical drills to prepare their bodies for the inevitable deployment. Keiji reaches for a steaming mug from the table to steady his nerves before the mission. Wisps of steam rise from the rim of the simple metal container he holds. Rita takes a quiet sip of the hot beverage while lost in her own private reflections. Keiji remains silent as he realizes he is no longer the only one experiencing the loop. The massive armored frame of a United Defense Force suit looms with the directive to protect. Large transport planes roar through the night sky toward the impending operation to retake Kotoyoshi Island. A copy of The Executioner's Style rests nearby as Rita prepares for her next mission. She sits pensively inside the transport while holding her head amidst the low hum of machinery. Her distant reflection stares back from the window as the aircraft cruises through the sky. The squad marches across the tarmac while the shimmering coastline of Japan appears in the distance. Rita carries her duffel bag toward a waiting plane as ground crews finish their final checks. Rumors of her incredible kill count circulate among the soldiers who recognize the legendary Valkyrie. Darkened silhouettes of curious recruits watch her every move from the edges of the hangar. The control tower stands tall against the hazy sky while the base buzzes with military activity. She tosses her gear onto a simple bunk and places her book on the mattress. Inside her quiet quarters, Rita prepares a ritualistic cup of coffee to steady her mind. She meticulously pours hot water through a filter as she seeks a moment of peace. A single dark drop ripples into the pot while she maintains her focused isolation. Wisps of steam rise from the brewing equipment during the calm before the coming storm. She gazes into the distance with a weary expression while contemplating her unique experience. Clutching a warm mug, she reflects on the necessity of looping once during the next battle. Rita stands in the center of her room while considering the trivial details of her novel. The book lies still on her bed as a silent witness to her solitary preparations. Strange celestial bodies hang over a landscape of clouds and distant mountain peaks. She walks toward her awaiting armor while suspecting that someone else may be sharing the loop. Rita lowers her gaze in deep thought as the reality of the impending conflict settles in. Flashbacks show her battle suit impaled by spikes during the first loop 3 years ago. She gazes ahead while concluding that she has no choice but to fight alone. A sudden sharp pain jolts through her mind as she clutches her head. Standing in her quarters, Rita laments the persistent headache while holding her morning coffee. She peers out the window at the massive formation of soldiers training below. Rows of recruits perform synchronized push-ups on the hot tarmac outside her room. She watches the display with a troubled expression while nursing her recurring migraine. The leaves of a nearby palm tree tremble against the gray military sky. Rita walks along the fence as the recruits reach their 98th grueling repetition. She reflects on her usual habit of keeping to herself before shipping out. Her intense gaze narrows as she questions her own presence near the training field. The line of soldiers continues their rhythmic exercise in perfect unison. One particular recruit struggles to maintain his form as he pushes his body further. A shadowy close-up reveals Keiji's fierce and determined eyes during the physical strain. Rita stops abruptly with a look of pure shock as she notices the recruit. She wonders what is happening with him while staring intently into his gaze. Her face goes pale upon realizing he looks like someone who has returned from hell. The raw intensity in the recruit's eyes leaves her momentarily frozen in place. She looks away while remembering that she has encountered such a gaze once before. Rita touches her forehead in deep contemplation as the weight of the discovery settles. Rita approaches an officer at his desk to issue a sudden formal request. Meanwhile, Keiji finishes his grueling sets of push-ups with sweat-soaked determination. Rita stares at the ground with a pained expression while pondering her next move. She stands over the resting recruit and suggests they find a better place to talk. A moment of quiet contemplation follows as she looks down with troubled eyes. The bright sun shines through palm fronds while she decides to postpone the conversation. Keiji remains bent over in exhaustion as Rita questions her sudden obsession with him. The military control tower stands as a silent sentinel against the gray sky. Other recruits begin to disperse from the training ground after the long session. Rita waits by the chain-link fence as Keiji slowly makes his way toward her. He walks forward with his face partially hidden by a dark and heavy shadow. Each step of his combat boots echoes against the pavement with steady precision. Rita watches him closely while noting how comfortable he appears in his fatigues. She analyzes his movements and realizes he walks like an experienced jacket pilot. Her suspicion deepens as she continues to watch his every move with sharp focus. A close-up of his clenched fist reveals mysterious numbers inked onto his skin. The handwritten digits for 159 stand out against his hand. She immediately asks what the numbers on his left hand are supposed to mean. Keiji looks down at the markings while preparing to address her direct question. He finally looks up with a fierce gaze and promises to provide the answer. Rita reacts with utter bewilderment to his cryptic and heavy statement. Keiji reveals that she asks him that very question while he lies dying tomorrow. His words leave the legendary soldier speechless as she searches his face for answers. He shifts the tone by mentioning the custom of complimentary green tea in Japan. The sudden realization hits her like a physical blow as she stares in shock. She remains frozen in place while the weight of his secret finally sinks in. A tense silence hangs between them as they stand before the chain-link fence. Keiji casts his gaze downward while his hair partially obscures his pained expression. Moisture begins to gather in Rita's eyes as she confronts the impossible truth. She breaks down into tears while Keiji stands close enough to hear her soft sobs. The hardened warrior wipes her face as she struggles to contain her mounting emotions. Keiji watches the Valkyrie cry while the sky remains indifferent to their plight. She turns away to hide her weeping face against the metallic fence mesh. The two soldiers stand as lonely figures amidst the backdrop of military wire. Sunlight glints off the fence while a moment of profound understanding passes between them. Keiji explains that the numbers on his hand track every single loop he has endured. Rita continues to wipe away her tears while listening to his grim explanation. He acknowledges her silence with a quiet word as they share this heavy burden. She finally looks up with determined eyes and confirms she understands his situation. The next day brings a violent assault on the northern tip of Kotoyoshi Island. Keiji swings his heavy weapon down to crush an enemy into the dirt. Orders roar through the comms for the 17th Company to support his solo assault. He narrows his eyes while his combat interface tracks several threats at once. The infantry team rushes into the fray determined to make this final attempt count. An alert signal chimes within his helmet as he monitors the shifting battlefield conditions. Keiji commits himself fully to the charge as the true fight finally commences. Bright streaks of fire illuminate the sky during the opening salvos of the engagement. Multiple detonations scatter the ranks of the advancing soldiers with violent force. A lone figure vaults through the air while brandishing a colossal tungsten axe. Rita slams into the ground with enough force to shatter the surrounding concrete. She apologizes for the delay while her face remains calm behind the protective glass. Yanabaru reacts with shock at the sudden appearance of the famous elite soldier. She introduces herself to the group while requesting access to their high-level commands. Keiji remains silent as he observes his partner's arrival through his targeting display. The ground erupts in a series of pillars of fire and smoke nearby. Soldiers exchange confused remarks about her odd choice of metaphors during the heat of battle. Rita processes the incoming data streams while preparing her next tactical maneuver. The pair of elite warriors launch themselves toward the front lines with synchronized speed. Keiji focuses on the rapidly updating icons that represent the looming mimic threat. A multitude of enemy signatures flood his radar screen as the monsters emerge in force. A massive swarm of spherical mimics surges forward with mindless aggression across the battlefield. Rita stares ahead with cold intensity as her targeting HUD locks onto her first prey. Keiji grits his teeth and tenses his muscles while preparing to unleash his accumulated experience. Both warriors accelerate with blinding speed, leaving sharp trails of motion in their wake. The two elite soldiers fight in perfect synchronization, tearing through alien ranks like a singular machine. Keiji reflects on the grueling path he took to master his partner's lethal combat techniques. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, the two warriors share a silent understanding through their gazes. Their fighting styles merge into a twin-like display of efficiency as they navigate the carnage. Rita issues final instructions over the comms regarding the destruction of the server backups. Keiji bellows his confirmation while pushing his heavy jacket to its absolute thermal limits. Memories of his countless deaths and previous failures flash briefly through his mind during the onslaught. He recalls the specific moment he realized he had become an irregular target for the enemy. The sheer exhaustion of dying repeatedly boils over into a roar of pure, unadulterated defiance. Sliding down a debris-strewn slope, he readies his massive tungsten axe for a decisive blow. The recruit finally lays eyes on the specific creature responsible for his chronological imprisonment. A massive, pulsating mimic server looms in the distance as the ultimate objective of the mission. Burning with hatred, Keiji remembers every drop of blood he spilled in his previous lives. He delivers a piercing blow that strikes deep into the fleshy core of a nearby monster. The impact generates a blinding flash as the creature's internal structure begins to disintegrate. Keiji completes his motion by lunging into a wide, powerful swing that cleaves through the air. Keiji's eye widens with a final surge of adrenaline as he screams his challenge toward the target. The massive creature is torn apart by a series of high-speed impacts and explosions. Navigating the debris, Keiji successfully neutralizes the enemy's communication antenna with a precise strike. Rita monitors the progress through her comms, confirming that the mission objectives are nearly complete. Another massive blast confirms the destruction of the Mimic's backup systems across the battlefield. The heavy armored suit hums with power as the soldier pushes forward into the final zone. Keiji delivers a crushing blow to the Mimic server as the long loop seemingly reaches its end. He suddenly jolts awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling in a state of shock. His pupils dilate as the realization of his surroundings begins to set in once more. A black marker rests on the bedsheet beside him, a tool used for his grim tally. Reaching out with a trembling hand, he picks up the marker to record the latest iteration. He begins to write the count on the back of his hand with practiced movements. The number 160 appears on his skin, marking another failed attempt at escape. He lies motionless in the quiet room, processing the crushing weight of his continued imprisonment. Cold sweat beads on his forehead as he realizes that his previous victory changed nothing. A surge of pure frustration erupts as he shouts a desperate question into the empty air. On the training grounds, Rita stands with her head bowed while soldiers watch her cry. Keiji watches her from a distance, feeling a deep sense of guilt for his actions. He approaches the weeping warrior and introduces himself for what feels like the 100th time. Rita looks up with tear-filled eyes and reveals her name to her fellow soldier. Keiji offers a small smile as he notices the other soldiers staring at them through the fence. Rita looks up with a puzzled expression and asks what he finds so funny. Looking down, Keiji admits that he is simply having a lot of fun in this moment. Rita wipes away her remaining tears and labels him a weirdo while onlookers watch them. The two stand in silence for a moment as the presence of the other soldiers looms. Suddenly, Rita reaches out and takes Keiji by the hand to pull him away. She gives him a direction and announces that they are making a break for it. Seagulls fly over the sparkling ocean while the number on Keiji's hand marks the loop. They run together along the top of a massive concrete seawall overlooking the harbor. Rita looks back and calls out Keiji's full name while they continue their escape. Keiji looks down in surprise, realizing that he is still holding on to her hand. Stopping for a second, Rita asks him if he could please let her go. Keiji quickly pulls his hand away and stammers a nervous apology for the contact. He watches her walk ahead, realizing that this version of Rita knows nothing about him. His expression turns somber as he accepts that every loop reset starts their relationship over. The pair reaches a desolate stretch of the coast filled with massive concrete tetrapods. Walking along the high ledge, Rita comments on the barren atmosphere of the area. She looks back at Keiji and mentions that the landscape reminds her of where she grew up. A combat boot steps firmly onto the concrete as they find a place to overlook the water. Gazing at the horizon, Rita admires the beautiful color of the clear sky above the ocean. Keiji asks if she likes the sky while watching her stare at the horizon. He notes the sharp contrast between the blue view and her blood-red jacket. Rita continues to look out over the shimmering water in reflective silence. She starts walking again while telling him to disregard her momentary lapse in character. Keiji stands his ground by mentioning the Rita Vertaski he has come to know. She pauses as the weight of his words captures her full attention. Turning her head, she looks back at him with a look of pure astonishment. Keiji quickly apologizes for acting like a know-it-all and steps back nervously. Rita smiles softly and admits they probably had this talk in an earlier loop. He looks down with a pained expression while lamenting the questions left unasked. Her eyes widen slightly as she considers the burden he carries alone. She offers a soft acknowledgement of the strange reality they share. Gazing back at the sky, she begins to understand his perspective better. Rita stands still on the ledge and asks if he knows what happens next. She laughs heartily at the idea of being able to ask about the future. Keiji retorts with annoyance that his situation is far from entertaining. Rita strikes a pose while insisting it is her turn to enjoy his suffering. She leans toward him to emphasize how she survived her own trials alone. Standing atop the concrete wall, Keiji looks at his hand with a tired expression. He notes they are ahead of schedule and decides to head to the cafeteria. Rita looks at Keiji with renewed curiosity while they prepare for their meal. The pair follows the signs leading toward the base's second dining hall. They find a spot among the other soldiers and begin eating their lunch. Rita picks up a single pickled plum with her chopsticks and examines it. Keiji observes her while noting they have arrived 30 minutes earlier than usual. She finally decides to take a bite of the traditional Japanese side dish. An immediate wave of intense sourness causes her face to flush bright red. Watching her struggle, Keiji realizes that her reaction never changes between loops. She suddenly spits the plum onto the metal tray with a loud clatter. Rita loudly claims the food was not sour as Keiji continues eating calmly. He effortlessly consumes his own plum while she watches him in disbelief. He calls the snack delicious as it drops back onto his plastic tray. Her gaze fixates on his food with a look of extreme skepticism and annoyance. Rita stands up from the table with a sudden burst of competitive energy. She stomps over to the kitchen counter to confront the bewildered lunch lady. The worker slams a full jar of pickled plums onto the service ledge. Rita begins shoveling the sour fruits into her mouth to prove a point. Keiji stares at her in absolute shock at such a reckless display. Her face twists in agony as the cumulative sourness overwhelms her senses. She eventually spits out another plum while the tray rings out once more. Rita stubbornly clutches the jar while insisting the plums are not sour at all. Keiji and the surrounding soldiers watch her extreme reaction with total disbelief. He decides to join in and pops another plum into his mouth. A seed clatters onto the metal tray as Keiji spits it out immediately. His gaze turns sharp and competitive as he challenges her resolve. They lock eyes in a silent duel to see who can endure more. Other soldiers enter the mess hall only to find a strange scene unfolding. A massive crowd gathers around their table to witness the bizarre competition. Yanabaru stops in his tracks and shouts in surprise at seeing them together. The two continue shoveling plums and spitting seeds while the soldiers cheer them on. Rita's lips become stained red from the juice of the many pickled fruits. Keiji reflects internally on how long it has been since he truly tasted food. A genuine smile finally breaks across her face despite the sourness. They collapse onto the floor laughing amidst a pile of discarded plum pits. Night falls over the military base as the sky fills with stars. Keiji and Rita sit together in a quiet room to share their stories. They talk for hours about their lives and the people they have met. He looks at the loop count on his hand while savoring the moment. Rita points out a specific passage in a book Keiji is reading. Their hands rest close together as they find comfort in each other's presence. The night settles over the military base as Keiji contemplates his need to survive the coming dawn. Light finally filters into his eyes as he wakes from a deep and peaceful slumber. He remains motionless on the bed while staring blankly at the ceiling in quiet contemplation. His fingers brush against the small object he has been carrying throughout the many loops. Sitting up abruptly, he realizes that he is not in his usual barracks room. Rita stands nearby in the early morning light while preparing to brew a fresh pot of coffee. He rubs his eyes and groggily greets her while trying to orient himself in the room. Memories of the previous night return as he looks out at the windows of the Sky Lounge. He confesses that it has felt like an eternity since he last enjoyed a restful sleep. Rita looks over her shoulder with a playful smirk and teases him for his dramatic words. Her sudden lightheartedness catches him by surprise as he stares up at her in silence. He begins to pull on his military boots while she continues her meticulous morning ritual. She turns back to the counter to open a special bag of imported coffee beans. A rich and unfamiliar aroma fills the air as Keiji catches a scent he cannot identify. The specialized brewing equipment sits ready on the table for their quiet morning meal. Rita explains that the intense smell comes from roasting high-quality, all-natural beans. She carefully pours the dark beans into the top of the manual wooden grinder. Keiji inspects the small beans in his palm while learning they were a gift from North Africa. A gentle and rare expression of contentment softens her features as they share this calm moment. He leans forward with a smile to help her grind the beans for their first real cup of coffee. The rhythmic sound of grinding fills the room as the beans are crushed into a fine powder. Keiji offers a promise to treat Rita to green tea once the final battle is won. Rita pauses at the mention of the war's end with a distant look in her eyes. The countdown continues as the morning sun creeps across the lounge where they sit. With absolute confidence, Keiji assures her that they will finish this conflict together. She turns her gaze toward him while considering his unwavering determination. A soft smile graces her lips as she voices her belief in his victory. He watches her in silence while the peaceful atmosphere lingers for just a moment longer. Steam rises from the portable stove as the water reaches the perfect temperature. Rita explains the intricate process of steaming the grounds to unlock their full flavor. She carefully pours a thin stream of hot water over the freshly ground coffee. The dark grounds bubble and bloom under the heat while releasing a powerful fragrance. Keiji inhales the rich scent with a relaxed expression while enjoying the rare tranquility. A dark liquid fills the metal mug as the brewing process finally reaches completion. They prepare to take their first sips of the specialty coffee in the quiet room. Suddenly a projectile shatters the window and tears through the air between them. Both soldiers jerk back in shock as glass shards explode across the lounge. Keiji's eyes widen with sudden dread as he recognizes the familiar shape of the weapon. A jagged mimic javelin lodges itself into the wall with a deafening thud. Far below, an overwhelming horde of mimics begins their surprise assault on the base. The monstrous mimics surge forward with their crushing jaws wide open while debris scatters everywhere. Mass explosions rock the southern side of the base as the invaders breach the perimeter. Keiji reels back in shock as he realizes this unprecedented event has deviated from the loops. A blinding streak of light cuts through the chaos as another projectile whistles past. Multiple javelins smash through the window and narrowly miss the two soldiers standing inside. Rita quickly ducks behind the counter while noting that the glass should have been javelin-proof. She calmly clicks the device while commenting on the high quality of Japanese manufacturing. Turning to Keiji, she explains that the mimics only use loops when they are losing. Below them, the battlefield erupts into fire and smoke as the surprise attack intensifies. Heavy tanks unleash devastating firepower against the horde while armored soldiers move into position. Keiji and Rita sprint across the high-rise metal walkways to reach the combat zone. They race down the corridors toward the equipment room as sirens blare through the facility. Rita remains focused on the mission ahead even as her name is shouted from behind. Shasta suddenly appears and gasps for air while struggling to catch her breath. The young mechanic expresses her relief at finding them amidst the unfolding disaster. She frantically reports that Rita's specialized jacket and battle axe are waiting in the workshop. Rita offers a brief word of thanks before urging the girl to find safety. A security card is passed over to the mechanic to secure a vital location. Rita issues a final strict command to keep everyone out of the room except for them. Shasta looks on with a determined gaze and accepts the responsibility of her task. Keiji looks on as Shasta solemnly accepts the weight of her mission. Rita leans in and makes a peculiar request regarding the base's high-ranking officials. Clutching the security card, the young mechanic shouts her commitment to the task. As Keiji rushes toward the hangar, Rita pauses to place her faith in him. She offers a quiet word of thanks to Shasta before heading into the fray. Left behind in the corridor, Shasta stares at the keycard with a conflicted expression. A heavy blast door slides shut and seals the soldiers inside the preparation area. Rita begins changing into her pilot's suit while lamenting their lack of time for coffee. Mounting their massive jackets, she continues a philosophical monologue about the quality of coffee. The two armored soldiers stand fully equipped as smoke from the explosions fills the air. Deep within the base, the ground trembles as the true battle finally begins. Looking ahead with sharp intensity, Rita vows that this loop will be the last. Keiji stands ready in his battle-worn armor and prepares to face the inevitable climax. Sergeant Farrell suddenly confronts Keiji and demands to know why he is still there. The sergeant screams in frustration as the facility's defenses continue to crumble. Outside, the night sky is illuminated by falling debris and massive structural fires. Keiji calmly informs his superior that the base is safe as long as they remain. The two legendary warriors walk toward the exit while ignoring Farrell's panicked pleas. Tightening his grip on his weapon, Keiji reflects on the nature of their involvement. Farrell stands paralyzed with shock as the two soldiers march into the flaming wreckage. Keiji stares forward with intense resolve and declares his need for the upcoming battle. Sergeant Farrell watches in disbelief as the young soldier fully commits to the suicidal charge. The armored jacket lunges into the chaos with a massive battle axe held high. Total devastation erupts across the base as mimic projectiles tear through the facility structures. Grinning behind his visor, Keiji welcomes the carnage as he engages the enemy forces. Rita chides him for the light-hearted attitude before vaulting into the heart of the fray. A thunderous impact shakes the ground as a powerful weapon slams into the target. Tracking her every move, Keiji anticipates Rita's rhythm to synchronize their deadly combat style. He swings his heavy axe downward with enough force to cleave through alien armor. The metal foot of a jacket stomps down hard to secure footing amidst the wreckage. Scanning the area, the sophisticated sensors lock onto the next wave of encroaching monsters. With a brutal combination of strikes, a soldier completely pulverizes a mimic into the dirt. Keiji realizes he can now provide perfect support without exchanging a single word. Rita focuses on the slaughter while trusting her partner to cover every blind spot. The two warriors move in perfect harmony as they charge deeper into the enemy lines. Nearby soldiers unleash a desperate hail of bullets against the overwhelming alien swarm. Massive explosions rip through the rounded mimic bodies as the defensive line holds firm. A panicked soldier screams about the futility of their struggle while Shasta cowers nearby. Soaring through the air, the two silhouettes prepare to bring their blades down on the horde. Rita and Keiji stand back to back as the undisputed masters of the blood-soaked battlefield. Farrell and his squad stand frozen in awe as they witness a display of pure combat power. A heavy mechanical foot crashes down onto the rubble with enough force to shatter the ground. Rita raises her voice above the noise of war to command the nearby troops to follow her. Nearby survivors and soldiers react with disbelief as they realize the legendary war hero has arrived. Keiji approaches the sergeant amidst the shell casings to confirm his survival during the initial onslaught. Two armored hands meet in a powerful grip to solidify a pact between comrades on the front lines. The young soldier transforms into a whirlwind of steel by spinning his massive battle axe at high speeds. Dust and sparks fly as the relentless rotation of the blade creates a lethal defensive perimeter. Sharp impacts send debris and alien ichor spraying into the air with every high-velocity swing. Keiji maintains perfect balance inside the mechanical storm while cutting down everything in his path. Pneumatic tissue and metal fragments are pulverized into fine dust by the continuous heavy strikes. Watching from a distance, the regular infantry marvel at the sheer impossibility of the duo's combat prowess. Pharaoh bellows a rallying cry to his men to follow the two warriors and retake their home. Fireballs and black smoke plumes rise from the base as the counter-offensive gathers momentum. The entire squad surges forward across the open tarmac with Keiji leading the desperate charge. Gritting his teeth, the sergeant throws himself into the fray with renewed vigor and raw determination. Soldiers and civilians alike witness the sudden shift in the momentum of the brutal engagement. A mechanical latch clicks open on the back of a jacket to reveal the critical internal components. As the chaos begins to subside 2 hours later, Rita assists Keiji with his equipment in the hangar. Looking him directly in the eyes, she declares that the time has come to eliminate the server. Keiji narrows his eyes in focus while the immense weight of the mission presses down on him. The two soldiers sprint toward the exit of the hangar while Rita confirms their final strategy. Keiji reflects on his past failure in the 159th loop and questions Rita's alternative tactics. The duo launches into a devastating synchronized attack that sends shockwaves through the enemy lines. A visceral roar escapes Keiji's lips as he hacks through the mechanical tissue of the mimics. The elusive server is finally spotted amidst the rising smoke and crumbling debris of the battlefield. After systematically destroying the local antennas, Keiji is blindsided by a sudden and violent shift in behavior. Rita's red jacket lunges forward with incredible speed while swinging her heavy battleaxe in a wide arc. Confusion and shock wash over Keiji as he realizes his partner is actually targeting him. A heavy mechanical stomp crashes down with lethal intent and forces the young soldier to evade. Rita looms over her comrade with a cold and clinical stance that leaves Keiji reeling in disbelief. Her visor remains cold and unreadable while she prepares her next decisive move against her partner. The legendary warrior pins Keiji to the ground with overwhelming force as he demands an explanation. Despite his desperate questioning, Rita continues her relentless assault with the precision of a seasoned killer. Standing amidst the dust, Rita begins to explain the mechanics of the mimic's tachyon signals. Keiji listens in stunned silence while his heads-up display flickers with the gravity of the situation. The secret of how human brains are inadvertently dragged into the alien time loops is finally revealed. The weight of this biological connection flashes through Keiji's mind with sudden and terrifying clarity. Fragments of previous lives and countless deaths swirl in a dark void of repetitive trauma. Pointing to her head, Rita reveals the truth that their own brains have become the antennas. Keiji stares back in utter horror as the magnitude of Rita's revelation sinks in. Rita explains that the intense migraines he experienced were a direct result of being a backup antenna. Memory fragments of Keiji clutching his head in agony during past loops flicker through his mind. The veteran soldier declares that her own escape from the loop is impossible while Keiji remains alive. A mechanical eye narrows as the cold logic of their situation becomes undeniably clear. Rita gazes at her comrade with a somber resolve while explaining the rules of their entrapment. Keiji realizes that the same logic applies to him, and that Rita is his own backup antenna. His eyes tremble with a mixture of fear and sorrow while the silence grows heavy between them. Rita bluntly states that only one of them can ultimately walk away from this battlefield. A dark silhouette of the full metal bitch is reflected in the wide, terrified pupil of Keiji. Standing amidst the smoke, Rita readies her massive battle axe for a final, tragic confrontation. The two elite soldiers square off against each other as the surrounding war continues to rage. Rita reinforces the necessity of their duel by claiming humanity needs a single loop breaker to win. Keiji screams in protest while searching for any alternative to this cruel and lethal paradox. Sparks fly as the legendary warrior begins her first series of aggressive strikes against her partner. A support helicopter suddenly descends over the area to offer assistance to the two supposed allies. Keiji looks up at his internal display while the radio crackles with incoming orders from command. Rita swings her axe with violent force to ward off anyone attempting to interfere with their duel. Her voice rings out with a chilling warning for all other soldiers to stay far away. Keiji gasps in shock as the final transmission wishes Rita good luck in her hunt. Rita and Keiji clash violently in a makeshift kitchen area, sending cookware and vegetables flying in every direction. Dodging a devastating strike, Keiji ducks low as Rita's weapon shatters the wooden table above his head. Keiji remains hyper-focused on his mentor's movements while circling around to find a momentary opening. A single eye peers through the chaos, reflecting the absolute grimness of this unintended death match. Rita delivers a crushing blow that pulverizes the wall, demonstrating the sheer mechanical power of her suit. Fragments of stone and metal rain down upon the combatants as the structural integrity of the room fails. Sliding across the debris-strewn floor, Keiji struggles to maintain his footing against the relentless momentum of Rita. Sweat pours down Keiji's face while he gasps for air, his body reaching its physical limit. The dark silhouette of the full metal bitch emerges from the dust, her glowing optics locked onto Keiji. Leaning forward in exhaustion, Keiji takes a fleeting second to steady his trembling hands and racing heart. Keiji grips his weapon with renewed vigor, preparing to launch his own offensive against the legendary warrior. Staring back with an intense gaze, Keiji acknowledges that his many deaths have prepared him for this moment. Rita's battle axe cuts through the air with a terrifying whistle, nearly catching Keiji in its wide arc. Memories of the number 5 once written on his hand fuel his determination to survive this nightmare. A look of raw defiance crosses Keiji's face as he resolves to fight against the cruelty of fate. Screaming with every ounce of his strength, Keiji pushes himself to move faster than ever before. The two warriors engage in a furious exchange of blows, their weapons clashing with earth-shattering force. Keiji reflects on the 159 battles that have led him to this final crossroad. Clamping his hand firmly onto his weapon, he refuses to let all his past suffering go to waste. Keiji executes a powerful, spinning strike as he commits himself fully to ending the loop once and for all. Rita's glowing visor pulses with sudden shock as she realizes Keiji has gained the upper hand. Lunging forward with desperate speed, Keiji delivers a punishing strike that shatters Rita's protective faceplate. Shards of reinforced glass explode outward, revealing Rita's wide-eyed expression of pure disbelief. Gasping for air, Keiji stares down his mentor while acknowledging their shared grim realization. Rita recovers her breath, her exposed face showing the same heavy exhaustion weighing on her protégé. The two combatants charge once more, their heavy suits churning up dust as they collide. Across the base, black smoke billows from burning towers and heavy artillery continues its relentless bombardment. Metal scraps and mechanical components fly through the air as the intensity of the duel peaks. A massive weapon slams into the concrete, sending a shockwave of debris across the fractured floor. Rita narrowly evades a lethal swing, her eyes tracking the blur of Keiji's heavy spear. Another thunderous impact pulps the surrounding stone, reducing the kitchen area to a wasteland of rubble. Standing amidst the settling dust, both warriors take a momentary pause to steady their trembling limbs. Rita's gaze remains fixed on Keiji, her focus sharpened by the life-or-death nature of this encounter. Sweat drips from Keiji's brow as he mentally prepares for the final, decisive exchange of blows. With a simultaneous burst of movement, they leap toward each other for one last frantic clash. Rita lets out a primal scream, pouring every remaining ounce of her willpower into her weapon. Keiji roars back with equal ferocity, refusing to back down from the woman he respects most. The two legendary soldiers cross blades in a blinding flash of steel and spraying fluids. Keiji stands silently in the aftermath, his head bowed as he contemplates the heavy cost of victory. Rita remains still, her long hair drifting in the wind as the loop finally nears its end. Rita lowers her head as she anticipates the strike that will finally conclude their cycle. A thunderous explosion of debris erupts as Keiji's final attack connects with devastating force. Leaning against the rubble, Rita sits motionlessly with her armored suit completely shattered. A close-up reveals the raw physical and emotional toll through a single, blood-streaked eye. Keiji gasps in horror as he realizes the magnitude of the wound he just inflicted. Rita gazes up with a calm expression, her eyes filled with a strange sense of peace. Through her broken visor, she softly admits defeat and declares Keiji the winner. Stunned by her words, Keiji stares back while sweat and dirt cover his trembling face. He rushes to her side, demanding to know why things had to end this way. Rita recalls how every battle in her long history has always led to this inevitable conclusion. Keiji stares at her in shock as he struggles to understand her tragic revelation. Rita explains that he is the only one destined to survive this endless time loop. Flashes of their shared memories haunt Keiji's mind while he looks down at her. He stammers out an apology through heavy tears, his voice cracking with immense grief. Smiling weakly, Rita tells him there is no need for apologies because he fought well. His eyes widen further as he struggles to accept the lonely future ahead of him. Keiji clings to her, desperately suggesting they stay in the loop to remain together forever. Rita looks at him with pity, reminding him she would never remember him each morning. He shouts out his defiance, claiming he doesn't care about her lack of memories. Rita gently touches his face and gives him one last command to save humanity. Rita urges Keiji to break this cycle before he suffers the same fate as her. Blood spills from her mouth as she coughs violently against his chest. Horrified, Keiji looks down at his gloved hands drenched in her dark blood. He gasps her name repeatedly while the weight of the moment crushes him. Lying weak in the wreckage, Rita tells him to say his final words quickly. Keiji remains silent for a moment as he processes the finality of her condition. A close-up shows 3 distinct impact marks on her damaged combat suit. Through heavy tears, Keiji finally confesses that he wants to stay with her forever. Rita looks back at him with soft eyes, relieved that she won't die alone. The orange glow of the sunset begins to fade behind the jagged ruins. She calls him a sentimental bastard while they sit together one last time. A peaceful expression settles over her face as her breathing grows shallow. Both soldiers gaze out at the red sky as the day finally ends. Rita's eyes close permanently as she slips away in the middle of the wasteland. Following the tragedy, Keiji successfully eliminates the remaining mimic threats and their server. He is later confined to the brig for ignoring orders during the final operation. 3 days later, Keiji stands on the roof to receive a prestigious military honor. He stares at the medal, the same decoration that Rita once wore in the past. Back in the barracks, his fellow soldiers ask who taught him his legendary skills. Keiji packs his gear and simply tells the sergeant that he was the teacher. Keiji learns from a comrade that he is being transferred to the U.S. Special Forces. Meanwhile, massive construction cranes work to clear the heavy debris from the base. Searching for his gear, Keiji walks through the hangar and asks about his jacket. He startles the mechanic, who is busy performing maintenance on a heavy combat suit. She apologizes profusely for allowing other soldiers to mess with his equipment. Keiji pauses when he notices a new addition to the surface of his armor. The words Killer Cage are now prominently written across his suit's plating. He stares at the nickname, contemplating the fierce reputation he has built. Accepting his new identity, he offers a small smile and tells her not to worry. The mechanic remembers something else and turns back with a look of realization. She presents the electronic keycard for the Sky Lounge that Rita entrusted to her. Keiji takes the card while the mechanic explains the difficulty of guarding it for days. He looks down at the small object, lost in thought for a brief moment. A tarp-covered combat suit stands silently in the background of the workshop. Keiji asks if she knows the reason behind Rita's choice of red armor paint. The mechanic looks at him and reveals that Rita simply wanted to stand out. Confused, Keiji questions why anyone would want to be so visible in a war zone. He offers a final word of thanks to the mechanic for her insight. The logic behind Rita's flamboyant color choice finally begins to make sense. He understands she made herself a target so all attacks would focus on her. Keiji listens as the mechanic asks him a personal question before he departs. She curiously wonders if he and Rita were friends for a long time. Keiji remains silent for a moment, his expression unreadable as he processes the inquiry. Noticing his hesitation, she quickly apologizes for prying into his personal life. She waits expectantly while he considers his answer with a serious look. Looking out over the construction site, he clarifies that they only met recently. Cranes continue their work on the damaged structures while Keiji moves toward the elevator. Crossing through the biohazard tape, he enters the elevator to reach the restricted upper floors. He steps into Rita's empty living quarters where the stale air suggests long abandonment. Standing alone in the center of the room, he reflects on his immense combat experience. He looks at her unmade bed and silently vows to win the war for her. The 3 jagged javelins embedded in the reinforced glass windows serve as a grim reminder. A paperback book titled The Executioner's Style sits abandoned on a nearby table. Her coffee-making equipment remains precisely where she left it before the final battle. He stares into a metal mug filled with dark coffee, his reflection shimmering on the surface. Keiji grips the mug tightly with both hands, feeling the cold metal against his palms. Taking a slow sip, he savors the bitter taste while remembering their shared moments. He decides to leave the red color to Rita's memory while choosing blue for himself. Gazing up at the vast clouds, he honors her love for the color of the sky.